Chapter 7:16. Bufang returned to the kitchen. The people outside were looking forward to it, and he was also looking forward to it. Taotai could be said to be the highest grade cooking ingredient he had ever encountered. To cook this kind of ingredient, he had to spend a lot of effort. At least, he couldn't use ordinary cooking methods to cook this dish. Bufang rubbed his chin, pacing back and forth in the kitchen. He was thinking about how to deal with the taotai meat. What should he cook? Sweet and sour ribs was a must. Anyway, it wasn't urgent. Bufang had long been familiar with cooking sweet and sour ribs, so it wouldn't take him much time to cook it. However, facing such a precious ingredient, if Bufang only cooked sweet and sour ribs, it would be a waste of God's gift. Although sweet and sour ribs wasn't bad, it wasn't the best way to cook taotai meat. What should he cook? Bufang leaned against the stove and gently tapped his fingers on it, producing a tapping sound. He rubbed his chin, squinting. Taotai meat, taotai tail, taotai ribs, taotai hoof, taotai head. Wait a minute. Bufang was calculating in his head. All of a sudden, his eyes shot out a dazzling light. The corners of his mouth curled up as he patted the stove. Hoof. Taotai hoof. Then, I'll grill taotai hoof. A gleam of excitement appeared on Bufang's stiff face, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Grilling taotai hoof seemed to be a good choice. Since that was the case, he would cook this dish. As for the Lord Go's sweet and sour ribs, he should cook this dish first. However, grilling taotai hoof wasn't easy. It was a complicated process. His mind flickered, and Bufang took out a hoof of taotai from the system-dimensional bag. In the system-dimensional bag, as long as Bufang's mind flickered, the part of the ingredient he wanted would appear. It was really convenient. However, he hadn't processed it yet. White fur grew on the hooves of the taotai. The taotia's hoof was huge, about the size of a wooden block. White taotai fur coiled around it, stained with blood. The taotai had hooves, the heel was the hoof, and the front two were the claws. The claws could be used for attack, while the hooves were used for speed. And this time, Bufang took the taotia's hoof. Green smoke billowed, and the pitch-black dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in Bufang's hand. The kitchen knife spun in his hand, and after Bufang twirled it, it slashed across fiercely. The blade light swirled and flickered unceasingly. Soon, the white fur was shaved off the hoof. After removing all the fur, Bufang took a deep breath. In the next instant, his true energy surged into the dragon bone kitchen knife, causing it to suddenly grow bigger. It turned into the golden dragon bone kitchen knife and rested on his shoulder. The kitchen knife slashed down, cutting the taotia's hoof into 8 pieces. After he was done, Bufang retracted his true energy and the golden dragon bone kitchen knife returned to its original pitch-black appearance. Twirling the knife, he picked up each piece of the hoof. Bufang used a special technique to massage the hoof, making the meat tender. It was a complicated procedure, but Bufang did it methodically and meticulously. After massaging each piece of the taotia's hoof, Bufang put them into a big basin. He poured the clear Heavenly Alps spirit spring water into the trotters and rinsed them. The blood stains and fur were all washed away, as well as some of the stains that had seeped out from the massage. After washing the hoof several times, Bufang poured all the water away. The arm wrapped in black and white bandages swung, and the heavy black turtle constellation wok emerged. Thud! The wok fell on the stove. There was a spot on the stove for the black turtle constellation wok. Bufang put the 8 taotia's hoof into the black turtle constellation wok, adding the cold heavenly mountain spirit spring water. However, Bufang didn't open the fire immediately. He swung his hand, taking out an orange-yellow spirit herb from the system-dimensional bag. It looked a little like ginger, but it was bigger, and the spirit spring water was thicker. He cut several slices of the spirit herb that looked like ginger, then sprinkled them into the wok. Then, he took out a blue and white porcelain jar, pouring the wine in it. Gurgle! The wine flowed, mixing with the heavenly mountain spirit spring water. Bufang took a step back, opening his mouth. All of a sudden, he spurted a golden-red heaven and earth obsidian flame. This flame wasn't the 10,000 bestial flame anymore, because it had fused with the Valley of Gluttony's heaven and earth obsidian flame. Its power and heat had become stronger. Boom! Rumble! As soon as the flame entered the wok, the temperature in the kitchen rose. This heaven and earth obsidian flame was under Bufang's control, so it could be as big or as small as Bufang wanted. It was really convenient, and this time, Bufang directly used the fire to boil it. After around the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the water in the wok began to boil. White foam and yellow foam floated, hovering on the surface of the wok. Bufang didn't stay idle. He wanted to skim off all the foam. The Taoya's hoof in the wok was boiling, and its meat was slowly changing. Bufang's formidable mental force surged, covering the black turtle constellation wok. He sensed the changes of the ingredients in the wok. In Bufang's mental force, these Taoya's hoof were like spirit energy bombs full of spirit energy. Once they exploded, the spirit energy they contained was enough to blast people into smithereens. The energy they contained was really terrifying. It was worthy of being the best ingredient he had ever encountered. Bufang exhaled deeply. His mental force didn't dare to slack off. It was like a taut bowstring. When he sensed it, it was almost time. Only then did Bufang retract his mental force and proceed with the next step. When roasting the Taoya's hoof, the first step was very important. The first step was to let the flavor permeate the meat. If the flavor didn't permeate the meat, it would be hard to let the flavor permeate the meat. And to permeate the meat, the marinade was needed. Bufang had marinade, but it was used to cook stinky tofu, so it tasted strange. Naturally, he couldn't use it to cook the Taoya's hoof. Thus, Bufang asked the system for a marinade, which cost him a lot of crystals. Bufang walked to the cabinet, taking out the marinade he had bought from the system. Opening the cabinet, there was a box inside, and inside the box were several pieces of frozen marinade, which were frozen with marinade. It wasn't bad to have a piece of marinade. Bufang took out the pieces of marinade, walking to the black turtle constellation wok. He didn't change the wok, as the foam in the wok had almost been removed. Carefully, he put the frozen marinade into the wok. In just a blink of an eye, the boiling soup had swallowed the piece of marinade, and the color of the soup in the wok began to change. The frozen marinade melted, and the brown-colored soup rolled in the wok. It had the aroma of spirit herbs and spirit ingredient. The two blended together, seeping into the Taoya's hoof. Foam began to appear in the wok again. Bufang continued to remove the foam, neither hurried nor slow. Of course, this time, when he was dealing with the foam, he also poured all kinds of ingredients with abundant spirit energy into the wok. Then, he added a drop of abyssal chili sauce. It made the Taoya's hoof taste richer. After simmering for a while, the foam in the wok was removed one more time. When it was boiling, there was no foam left. Bufang took out some ice crystals of rock sugar, adding them into the wok. Then, he added some soy sauce to make the color of the soup more beautiful. After that, he put the wok aside and continued to simmer. Dealing with the Taoya's hoof before roasting it was a long process. Of course, although it took a long time, the black turtle constellation wok had a thick meaty aroma wafting out as it simmered. That meaty aroma seemed to have some magical power, which made people's minds sink into it. The aroma of the meat wafted and slowly spread from the kitchen to the restaurant. The people sitting at the table were bewildered. Their noses twitched as they sniffed the aroma in the air. Lord Go was lying under the path understanding tree, snoring loudly. However, when he smelled the meaty aroma, he opened his eyes, which were filled with joy. Smells so good. This meaty aroma. How could it be so thick? It seems to linger in my heart. I can't get rid of it. Yang Meiji clenched her big fists, her face intoxicated. Sorceress and Xing's big breasts trembled, and her face blushed. It smelled so good that she didn't dare to breathe. She was afraid that she would breathe the aroma she had just inhaled. Yu's eyes brightened, gazing at the kitchen. Nangong Wuk's listless appearance changed, and his saliva almost flowed out of his mouth. It was really too fragrant, too mesmerizing. Luo Danqing opened his closed eyes. He didn't continue to recover. Just like the others, he sniffed the meaty aroma in the air. Chu Chongqing was more reserved. No matter what, he was the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony. What kind of dishes had he not seen? What kind of aroma had he not smelled? He looked at the people who didn't care about their image. Instantly, his white beard rose. These people had never seen the world. Gulp, Chu Chongqing swallowed his saliva, rubbing his nose. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. The meaty aroma entered his nostrils, making his eyes brighten. It's worthy of being Taotai meat. It's the supreme delicacy that the Valley of Gluttony's ancient books have recorded. Chu Chongqing exclaimed inwardly. Instantly, he looked forward to it. Taotai meat was a high-grade ingredient. Of course, not every chef could cook it. If one didn't have enough competence, he would suffer a big loss if he wanted to cook this dish. Even the first-grade chefs of the Valley of Gluttony weren't sure that they could prepare this ingredient well. He wondered what kind of dish Bufang would cook. Chu Chongqing suddenly had a little bit of hope. He had come here to take Xiao Ye to the Valley of Gluttony to receive the inheritance. But now, it seemed like he should taste this Taotai meat first before leaving. If he missed this delicacy in front of him, it would be a crime. In the kitchen, Bufang added some crystal salt to the boiling black turtle constellation wok to make it more delicious. After boiling for a while, he retrieved the heaven and earth obsidian flame. After retrieving the flame, he added a few drops of special oil. It wasn't the oil he usually used to stir-fry. It was Bufang's special oil, which could enhance the freshness of the dish. And now, the first part was completely completed. He scooped out the orange-yellow Taoyes hoof, drained the soup, and placed them on a big blue and white porcelain plate. Bufang took a step back, taking a deep breath. After the Taoyes hoof had cooled down to a warm temperature, Bufang brushed the syrup he had prepared on each hoof. He wanted to start the last step. Grill. Taoyes hoof. Chapter 7:17. She whimpered, relying on her intuition to carry the plate with the remaining roasted hoof to the dining table. You didn't want to care about them. A figure had appeared beside his head without him noticing. The last plate, 2 hoof. It was just the right time for the 2 of them. She didn't hesitate, turning around and leaving. Great Elder Chu, why don't you use your power to suppress a dog? Nangong Wuk leaned on his chair, his nostrils flailing. Her little mouth could not help but pout. She was rather happy. Here. Take these 2 roasted Taoyes hoof out, Bufang said faintly, looking at Yu who was so excited. Bufang took out the metal rack from his system-dimensional bag. It was the rack he had used in the magical hand conference to roast hoof. Now it was a good tool to use to roast hoof. I'm so angry. Why is it so hard to eat hoof? However, at this moment Yu ignored Bufang. She was enjoying the roasted Taoyes hoof, and her mouth was covered in oil. While she was carrying the hoof, she imitated Yu and took a bite. The mystic flame jumped into the black turtle constellation wok. In just a blink of an eye, the temperature in the kitchen rose. The aroma twirled, and essence energy surged. When people looked at the hoof, they felt like they were watching a handsome Taotai running under the setting sun. Even so, it was still a little difficult. However, the hoof was bigger than her head, which made her a little unsteady when she walked. He scooped out the broth from the black turtle constellation wok, making it dry. Then, he took a step back, opened his mouth, and spurted a mouthful of gold-red heaven and earth obsidian flame. His face was indifferent. His white hair and beard fluttered in the wind, giving him the air of an immortal. That smell had the thick aroma of Taoyes meat, and it was full of essence energy and spirit energy. That energy seemed to condense into a real substance, making the roasted Taoyes hoof glow. However, a moment later, he was bewildered. It smelled so good. Yu nodded and took the blue and white porcelain plate from Bufang's hands. He swung the dragon bone kitchen knife, flipped the Taotia's hoof, and roasted it in different directions. Her tall and slender body suddenly stood up, and her long black hair fell down. Chu Chongqing was bewildered. It was sparkling and translucent like a pearl hanging on the Taotia's hoof. "You serve the dishes." As usual, Bufang shouted from the window. However, the black turtle constellation wok could change its size according to Bufang's will, so it wasn't a problem for it to withstand the 8 hooves. The corners of Chu Chongqing's mouth twitched. Chu Chongqing almost vomited blood. It was the first time he had met such a shameless person. He was so angry that his beard curled up. Yu, who was sitting on her seat and sniffing the aroma of roasted meat in the air, heard Bufang's shout, and her eyes suddenly lit up. Her upper and lower lips bit the Taotia's hoof, and Nethery felt her vision blurred. Placing the grill on the black turtle constellation wok, Bufang rose his hand to sense the temperature of the wok. Then, he placed the Taotia's hoof, which was coated with syrup, on the grill. Munch. A moment later, she stooped and bit a hoof that wasn't as big as her head. The others also looked at him with gloating eyes. "Even the chef wants to eat it? So, there's only one left, right? It's the last plate." Seeing you enjoying it so much, the others couldn't help but want to eat it. He extended his paw, grabbing the roasted hoof. Then, he opened his mouth and bit it. "Woof! It's really delicious. After all, it's the meat of an almighty realm spirit beast. I'm looking forward to the sweet and sour Taotai ribs." The fat on Lord Dog's body jiggled, and a look of pleasant surprise appeared in his eyes. Bufang placed the plate on the table, looking at Chu Chongqing and Luo Danqing. Then, he took a bite of the roasted pig's hoof, his face intoxicated. While he was intoxicated, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared, slashing and cutting the roasted Taotia's hoof into 2 halves. The sugar juice was somewhat viscous. It brushed over the hoof of Taotai, causing the originally orange-yellow color of Taotia's hoof to become even brighter. It flickered with a crystal light. Just looking at it would cause one's appetite to soar. In just a blink of an eye, they reached the window. "You serve the dishes," Bufang called through the window. "Little girl, you go," said Xiaoya with a piece of meat in her mouth. Drops of oil oozed from the Taotia's hoof, slowly trickling down. However, they didn't splash on the ground. As soon as the dish was taken out of the window, a thick aroma assaulted Yu's face. A piece of meat was sucked into his mouth by his tongue. That delicious feeling stimulated his taste buds, causing the fur on Lord Dog's body to flutter. However, Chu Chongqing stopped him. Chu Chongqing had learned his lesson. Before Bufang could call him, he flicked his sleeves and flew to the window, waiting for the hoof to appear. Compared to the dragon blood rice, oh, it's a little better. Chu Chongqing, Yang Meiji, Sorceress and Sheng, Nangong Wuk and Xiaoya, who was standing on the chair, surrounded the only barbecued trotters. They looked at each other with sharp eyes. Nethery's eyes gazed at the Taotia's hoof. She stuck out her tongue, licking her red lips. After spoiling it, he turned his head and took a bite of the roasted hoof. Bufang used the kitchen knife in his hand to pick up a roasted Taotia's hoof and put it on the blue and white porcelain plate. "Old man, you're not being fair. What do you mean by help me taste?" "With Xiaoya's relationship with me, of course, I'll help her taste. You should wait for the other roasted hoof." He helped Xiaoya catch the plate, talking lovingly. The white meat inside the rosy Taotia's meat was exposed, steaming hot. Nangong Wuk grinned, and his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. His face was almost touching the roasted hoof as he spoke in an incomparably natural manner. "Smells so good." Chu Chongqing glanced at Luo Danqing, who was coughing blood and sitting pitifully in the distance. His beard fluttered. Xiaoya was bewildered. She couldn't eat it? Why? Nethery thought to herself. Then, she took another bite at the hoof. That beautiful and exquisite roasted hoof was like a work of art. It made their hearts clench. Chu Chongqing had prepared a big blue and white porcelain plate. It was rare for him to encounter something he was interested in. Of course, he wouldn't retreat. As the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony, if he retreated when he encountered something delicious, he would lose his face big time. Bufang held the plate with one hand and grabbed a piece of roasted taoye's hoof with the other. He took a big bite. It was mainly because the metal rack wasn't big enough. However, what he got was a pair of eyes that looked at him like he was an idiot. Once that hoof was on the table, it would be Chu Chongqing's. Since the Lord Go already had food, he could use his power to oppress others. Thus, Bufang had to separate and roast 4 hoof at once. She was really enjoying the food, and her heart was also very happy. Then, we don't need to worry anymore. Just eat, said Bufang casually. Thus, Bufang packed the 2 hoof and brought them to the window where they usually opened for business. Yang Meiji and the others also chuckled. After brushing the 4 taoye's hoof with syrup, he placed them on the grill. His other hand held the dragon bone kitchen knife. As the temperature of the heaven and earth obsidian flame increased, the taoye's hoof had some changes. He didn't mind Chu Chongqing, who was bursting with energy, nor did he mind the others' surprised looks. "Io, my little girl, come, my handsome brother Wuk will come and help you." When Nangong Wuk saw this scene, he immediately dashed out. The aroma slowly twirled around. Even Bufang was tempted by this aroma. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. In the next round, Yang Meiji and Ensheng followed the same pattern and went along with it. Even the largest plate could only fit about 2 hoof. Bufang released his mental energy. One of his hands controlled the flame while the other flipped the taoye's hoof. He heated the hoof evenly, which allowed the aroma to seep into it. He sprinkled the spiritual herb powder he had prepared on the taoye's hoof. The hoof looked even more enticing. It was red with sparkles of translucent light. The aroma and steam twirled around it. Under the lamplight, it looked like a beautiful emerald gem. "Come on. It's the last dish," said Bufang. This roasted hoof was really enticing, and the aroma was so intoxicating. Chu Chongqing was so angry that his beard fluttered. In fact, the taoye's hoof was edible now. Moreover, it would taste good. However, to Bufang, it wasn't the final product. She held the big roasted taoye's hoof with both hands and bit off a piece of tender and delicious meat. Everybody's eyes fell on the roasted taoye's hoof. They couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. Xiaoyu was drooling. She extended her small hand, wanting to pick up the roasted hoof. Chu Chongqing was so happy. Being rejected, Chu Chongqing wasn't happy. "You kids, I'm the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony. I'm in existence at the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder. Do you think I'd cheat you of your food?" The Taotai was brutal when he was alive. His meat isn't something you can eat casually. Don't say that I'm using my power to oppress you. Today I want to taste it first. Xiaoya, the taoye's soul in your body has just been taken away. You shouldn't touch the taoye's meat this early. Let the great elder taste it for you. The roasted taoye's hoof with the abyssal chili sauce was so delicious that people couldn't help themselves. Lord Go took a bite. His eyes became blurry, and the fat on his face shivered. He continued to chew on the roasted hoof. It was the first time Bufang had smelled such a delicious aroma. However, right after Chu Chongqing's imposing aura had suppressed them, the taoye's hoof was as big as a wooden block. Because the taoye's hoof was as big as a wooden block that required 2 people to encircle, even though it was divided into 8 parts, it was still not small. Bufang walked out of the kitchen with the roasted hoof. He looked at Chu Chongqing, who was squatting by the window with a speechless face. Of course, Yang Meiji and Sorceress and Xing gawked. They wouldn't give in. The meat on the hoof skin had become crispy because of the syrup. The aroma of the meat diffused with the faint scent of the syrup and spirit herbs. Xiaoya's eyes brightened. She got off the chair and ran to the window to receive the second portion of the hoof from Bufang. While they were fighting for the first plate of roasted taoye's hoof, Bufang had just finished the second. This roasted taoye's hoof, was really delicious. Yu's eyes brightened unceasingly. Her mouth was chewing unceasingly. After chewing, she held the big hoof, aimed at a spot, and took another bite. It was really fragrant. Chu Chongqing was so excited to taste the Taoyue's meat. He had a lot of expectations for the Taoyue's meat. He had made this metal rack to barbecue. But now it was really difficult to use it to roast 8 Taoyue's hoof. Munch munch munch. Chapter 7:18. Bufang's knife slashed down. He controlled his strength well. The sharp dragon bone kitchen knife slashed down, directly cutting the big piece of Taoyue's hoof on the blue and white porcelain plate in half. After everything was done, Bufang happily took a bite of the roasted Taoyue's meat, letting the oil splatter. Chu Chongqing calmed down, looking at the remaining half of the hoof. His face was emotionless. Yeah, he didn't need to worry anymore, however. Compared to the other people's big hoof, Chu Chongqing felt it was unfair. Anyway, he had cultivated for so many years, so his state of mind wasn't bad. Although he felt a little regretful, he still picked up the piece of hoof. The aroma of the hoof was thick. Although it was cut in half, it didn't affect its beauty. As for the taste, Chu Chongqing hadn't tasted it yet, so he didn't want to comment. Taotai meat was precious. In the entire Hidden Dragon continent, there weren't many Taotais, even if they weren't purebred. Purebred Taotais were the real ancient beasts. It was hard to imagine how strong they were. With just a little bit of their bloodline, the black and white Taotais were already so intimidating. When the real Taotai appeared, who could resist it? Even the Valley of Gluttony didn't have any records about the real purebred Taotai. That kind of existence could only exist in legend. Chu Chongqing sighed. Perhaps the only Taotai in the Hidden Dragon continent had become this roasted hoof in front of him. Chu Chongqing didn't know whether he was happy or sad. He took a bite. A piece of crispy Taotai meat was instantly bitten off. The oily juice flowed out from the gap where it was bitten. It was golden in color and sparkled brilliantly. It was too beautiful to behold. There was also a rich fragrance that spread out from it and lingered around. As soon as the meat entered his mouth, the crispy feeling made Chu Chongqing's pores shrink. His eyes showed a gleam of fear. This texture, this taste, this aroma filled his mouth delicious. Chu Chongqing exclaimed inwardly. He couldn't help but start to chew. The meat was chewy, but it didn't make him feel tired. Moreover, the meat's fragrance kept bursting out, mixing with the meat, making people drown in it. Firstly, it was delicious, and secondly, it was fragrant. This kind of fragrance was different from other spirit beast meat. Chu Chongqing, who was used to eating good food, couldn't help but shiver. Being the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony, of course, his cooking skills weren't ordinary. He was the special grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony, and his cooking skills were exquisite. However, facing this roasted Taoyue's hoof, he was deeply attracted. Chu Chongqing's eyes brightened. He continued to chew and swallow the Taoyue's meat. The clothes that were draped over his body suddenly bulged up, as if they were being held up by an invisible aura. Ha ha ha! Delicious! This is the best dish I've tasted recently. Waha! Chu Chongqing looked like he had gone crazy. His eyes shot out bright light as he opened his mouth and laughed. The oil in his mouth splattered everywhere. Bang! The clothes on Chu Chongqing's body exploded, turning into pieces of rags that fluttered in the wind. He actually ate until his clothes exploded. Chu Chongqing looked at his torn clothes and his bulging muscles, his face bewildered. It had been a long time since his clothes had exploded. Chu Chongqing shook his head, his face filled with emotions. This little chef really did have some skill. Only a special grade chef's dish could make his clothes explode like that. Of course, Bufang's dish wasn't just because of the ingredient. Because of the excellent ingredients, the dish's taste had risen to another level. That was why it could make Chu Chongqing's clothes explode. At this moment, inside the restaurant, no one was talking. They were hugging their Taoyue's hoof and chewing it continuously. They ate until their mouths were covered with oil. They were so happy. Luo Danqing was also eating slowly. Although he looked disheveled, his movements were much more elegant. No matter what, he was the jade-faced alchemist. His movements were naturally elegant. Elegantly taking a bite of the Taoye's hoof, Luo Danqing's tired eyes brightened as soon as the meat entered his mouth. What he cared about first wasn't the taste of the meat. Of course, the Taoye's meat was delicious. However, what he cared more about was the thick essence energy and spirit energy that the Taoye's meat had when it entered his stomach. Almost in a blink of an eye, these two energies started to nourish his wounds. Luo Danqing felt his wounds itch. Then, under the abundant spirit energy, his wounds were recovering at a speed that naked eyes could observe. His internal wounds were slowly recovering, and the true energy in his body had increased. Was this the effect of the Taoye's meat? Luo Danqing's eyes brightened. He didn't care about his elegance anymore. He continued to chew and gnaw on the Taoye's meat. You ate fast. No matter what, she was the first one to eat. Just like that, she finished the big piece of Taoye's hoof. Wiping her oily mouth, Yu pouted, her eyes filled with excitement. The surging essence energy in the Taoye's hoof made her feel so comfortable. She couldn't help but indulge in that comfortable feeling. She wanted to eat another piece. Unfortunately, she didn't have any more. Thus, she looked at the others eating, her face aggrieved as she looked at them eagerly. Lord Dog was concentrating on gnawing on the Taoye's hoof. The fat on his body was shaking. All of a sudden, he seemed to feel a gaze filled with longing. Squinting his eyes, he saw Nethery looking at his roasted hoof. This little girl wanted to do something bad to his roasted hoof. Lord Go's fat body shook. He bared his teeth at Yu for a while, as if he was warning her to stay away from his roasted hoof. When Lord Go bared his teeth, he could see the fine Taoye's meat between his teeth. It was really funny. Yu rolled her eyes, her face emotionless. Then, she turned to Bufang. Bufang was bewildered. He indifferently glanced at Yu. Both of them were expressionless. Meanwhile, Bufang's emotionless face had inadvertently increased his speed of gnawing the Taoye's hoof. Nethery's nostrils flared, and she turned her head in disdain, her gaze landing on Xiaoya. At this moment, Xiaoya was happily holding the bone she had just gnawed clean, dancing with joy. All right. This little girl didn't look big, but her appetite was really big. Yu indifferently glanced at her. Then, her eyes shifted to Nangong Wuk, who wasn't far from her. Nangong Wuk seemed to sense Yu's gaze. His pupils shrank. Without saying anything, he opened his mouth, stuck out his tongue, and licked the roasted hoof. Then, he proudly revealed his white teeth. Yu's mouth convulsed. She hated that she couldn't slap that fool to death. Since there was no more food, Yu angrily crawled back to her netherworld ship to sleep. The others continued to gnaw on the Taoye's hoof. The restaurant was filled with a thick aroma after a long time. Everybody had eaten their fill. After eating a big piece of Taoye's hoof, they felt a little bloated. Everyone leaned back in their chairs, rubbing their stomachs as they exhaled happily. Being able to eat such delicacies was an indescribable happiness. Yang Meiji and Enxing leaned on their chairs. Enxing's big breasts slightly shook, which attracted people's eyes. The two of them were Bufang's apprentices. After tasting such a delicious dish, their hearts were filled with excitement. Would they be able to cook such a delicacy in the future? Just thinking about it made them look forward to it. If they could eat such delicacies every day, what kind of happiness would it be? Bufang curled up on his chair. He also felt satisfied. This kind of delicacy was really rare. Indeed, the dishes cooked with good ingredients were even more delicious. Seems like I have to find more delicious ingredients in the future. Bufang thought to himself. All of a sudden, the air in the restaurant fluctuated, and Chu Chongqing was bewildered. Chu Chongqing was bewildered. A moment later, he straightened his body. His face was so stern as he opened his mouth to breathe. Buzz, after a buzzing sound, a small vortex emerged above his head. It spun rapidly, becoming bigger and bigger. At this moment, if someone were outside the restaurant, they would see a massive vortex of spirit energy that was dozens of miles wide in the sky above the cloud mist restaurant. Torrential spirit energy unceasingly congregated into the restaurant. Chu Changxing's body seemed to radiate a dazzling radiance. Energy diffused. Many people were bewildered. Was he going to break through? In the next moment, almost everyone's expression changed. Nangong Wuk felt as though the energy in his body was about to overflow. He sat cross-legged, his clothes fluttering even though there was no wind. His aura fluctuated unceasingly. Yang Meiji and Ensheng were also doing the same. They were preparing to break through. Luo Danqing had entered his cultivating state. His wounds were healing at a speed that naked eyes could observe. Not only that, but his cultivation base had also increased a little. As for the little girl, Xiaoya, there was nothing strange happening. This little girl has a key in her body that has collected all the spirit energy she had absorbed. That's why she didn't break through. Lord Go lazily watched the scene, speaking faintly. Those people's breakthrough wasn't beyond his estimation. The Taotai meat was a spirit beast at the Almighty Realm, after all. The spirit energy and essence energy it contained were enough to help them break through. Moreover, since they had been cooked, they wouldn't explode because of the abundant spirit energy. The spirit energy would hide in their bodies, and as they cultivated, it would subtly affect their cultivation base. Therefore, in a short period of time, these little fellows would be able to improve crazily when cultivating. Of course, the old man was different. The spirit energy and essence energy from the Taotai meat were enough to support him to break through this time. However, this breakthrough wasn't ordinary. It was a leap of quality. After all, this old man's cultivation base had reached the peak of the divine soul realm with a 7-step soul ladder. He was close to the 8-step soul ladder. Today, under the stimulation of the Taotai meat, he had a complete breakthrough. The spirit energy vortex above his head moved. Steps of the soul ladder began to emerge. It looked like he was about to reach the sky. Chapter 719. The entire heavenly mist city seemed to be boiling at this moment. A funnel-shaped spirit energy vortex appeared in the sky above the heavenly mist city, covering the entire city. The massive spirit energy moved and hovered. At this moment, the entire heavenly mist city seemed to darken, and the wind and clouds changed colors. Many people didn't know what was going on. They had just experienced a terrifying battle, and now, such a terrifying phenomenon appeared. Many residents of Heavenly Mist City thought it was the end of the world. However, some knowledgeable people didn't think so. It was an expert breaking through. Some people exclaimed inwardly. Some were so excited, and some even opened their arms, bathing in the spirit energy that seemed to have condensed into liquid form. They crazily absorbed the spiritual qi, feeling the comfortable feeling when the spiritual qi poured into their bodies and washed over their bodies. When a peerless expert broke through, they would also benefit from it. When a man achieved the Tao, even his chickens and dogs could ascend to heaven. The glory obtained would benefit many people, and the spiritual energy vortex caused by the breakthrough of a top-notch expert would increase the density of the spiritual energy by several times. Cultivating in such a dense environment would yield half the result with twice the effort. Inside the restaurant, Chu Changxing's entire body bloomed with dazzling light. A white soul ladder emerged above his head. The 7-step soul ladder was really magical. Lines moved on it, and each step was flat and smooth. The higher one climbed, the more magical it became. It bloomed with dazzling light, which was as dazzling as white jade. The jade moved and energy boiled. Chu Changxing's entire body became solemn. He opened his mouth and energy gushed out. His body glowed as he was receiving the baptism of the heaven and earth spirit energy. His bones seemed to radiate light, which was really magical. With Chu Changxing as the center, Nangong Wuk and the others sat cross-legged around him, closing their eyes to break through. Their bodies were also densely covered in spirit chi, and shackles were swaying in the void. After eating a piece of Taotia's hoof, many people had broken through at the same time. Xiaoya looked at them suspiciously. She was pulled by Bufang, and Bufang's bandaged hand touched the little girl's head. Bufang brat, you still owe your Lord Go a meal of sweet and sour Taotia's meat ribs. Don't think of reneging on your debt. Lord Go will go take a nap first. Come and wake your Lord Go when you are done. Lord Go opened his mouth wide and yawned before walking toward the path understanding tree. To him, the energy in the Taotia's meat was better than nothing. It could help Chu Chongqing and Nangong Wuk break through, but if he wanted the Lord Go to break through, this was simply impossible. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. This lazy dog was too much. He had just eaten the roasted Taotia's hoof, but he was still thinking about the sweet and sour Taotai ribs. He only knew how to eat all day. He was so fat, but he was still thinking about eating. Bufang shook his head, sighing emotionally. Where was the handsome, divine Lord Go? These little fellows are breaking through. They're really noisy. Lord Dog's gentle and magnetic voice rang out. Then, it laid down under the path understanding tree and fell into a deep slumber in no time. Since Bufang's breakthrough was different from theirs, he was okay after eating the roasted Taotia's hoof. Xiaoya didn't know why, but she wasn't affected. The others were breaking through. Even Luo Danqing, who was hurt badly, seemed to be recovering fast. Moreover, his mental state was improving unceasingly, and his aura was increasing. Rumble! Rumble! In the void, countless wisps of spirit energy congregated, and the formidable mental energy floated. Chu Chongqing frowned, sitting cross-legged. Both of his hands were making strange hand seals. His mind was shaken. Bufang's eyes were bright. It was the first time he saw a divine soul realm expert break through. Because of the system, Bufang's breakthrough was always done quietly. This was the first time he saw such a grand breakthrough, so he was a little curious. Buzz, after a buzzing sound, Chu Chongqing's entire body shivered. A moment later, mental energy gathered above his head, turning into a little man. It was Chu Chongqing. His white beard and hair fluttered in the wind. Chu Chongqing's eyes were solemn and serious. When one reached the Divine Soul Realm, every breakthrough was a test. The Divine Soul Realm had 9 steps of the Soul Ladder. After each step, the mental energy would be stronger, and the God Soul would also be stronger. Being able to condense 8 steps of the Soul Ladder meant that one's competence was considered first class in the Hidden Dragon continent. Even some experts at the Divine Soul Realm with an 8-step Soul Ladder could be called almighty. They could break the void and travel through it. That kind of existence was truly intimidating. Because of their powerful God Soul, they weren't afraid of the void's erosion. Their bodies were also nourished by the God Soul, which made them more intimidating than the Divine Physique Realm. If the Divine Physique Realm was the foundation, then the Divine Soul Realm was the foundation to build a skyscraper. The 9-step Soul Ladder was the skyscraper. Once the skyscraper was completed, one could overlook the common people. The real existence at the Divine Soul Realm with a 9-step Soul Ladder was the real Almighty. Almighty, even in the Holy Lands, were existences that could subdue an entire region. In the other forces of the Hidden Dragon continent, they were the pillars. And above the Divine Soul Realm was the Divine Spirit Realm. To reach the Divine Spirit Realm, one must first step on the 9-step Soul Ladder and ignite the divine flame in the God Soul. Only then could one become a real existence at the Divine Spirit Realm. Once one entered the Divine Spirit Realm, he would be in existence at the level of a sect master. In the entire Hidden Dragon continent, he would be the real peak existence. The previous White Taotai was a spirit beast at the almighty level. Of course, to a large extent, this almighty level wasn't true. Since the White Taotai had just broken the seal, many of its abilities hadn't recovered yet. Perhaps its fighting capacity was equal to an existence at the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder. And because of that, the Lord Go had smashed it to death with his paw. No doubt, the fat black dog in the Cloud Mist restaurant was a real spirit beast at the almighty level. There was no doubt about it. It was in existence at the peak of the great ethereal realm among the netherworld creatures. Chu Chongqing, who had transformed into a little man, wore a solemn face. Facing an earth-shaking pressure, he strode forward, stepping on the jade-white soul ladder. The pressure expanded. Boom! He stepped on the first step of the soul ladder. Without slowing down, he continued to step on the second step of the soul ladder. Then, the third step, the fourth step. The further he went, the longer it took him to prepare. Because the higher the soul ladder was, the greater the pressure on his mental energy was, and the greater the effect on his god soul. He was under a lot of pressure, so he walked even slower. Finally, under such a difficult situation, he stepped on the 7th step of the soul ladder. In front of the 7th step was a torrential spirit energy storm. That spirit energy storm was like a terrifying beast opening its mouth, as if it wanted to swallow everything. Chu Chongqing didn't stop, continuing to stride forward. One of his feet stepped on the void. Energy moved. Countless wisps of spirit energy and energy gathered under his feet, turning into real entities. His mental energy surged torrentially. Chu Chongqing felt that the energy in his body was boiling unceasingly. His body bloomed with dazzling light. Rumble! Rumble! The spirit energy storm above Heavenly Mist City continued to sweep. Lightning flashed, and the storm roared. Under Chu Chongqing's feet, the white light condensed, turning into the new 8th step of the soul ladder. It was as white as a beautiful jade, incomparably dazzling. He had finally broken through to the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder. On the 8th step, it was a pitch-black chaos. Chu Chongqing, who had transformed into a little man, watched for a long time before turning into light and dispersing. The 9th step of the soul ladder wasn't something he could create at this moment. His cultivation base wasn't high enough, and his innate talent couldn't reach that level. He wasn't like many spirit beasts. As long as they could survive and absorb the essence of heaven and earth for a long time, they would eventually break through, or they could rely on the bloodline of the antiquity-time spirit beasts to enter a higher realm. Humans couldn't do it. They needed to struggle and work hard. They had to rely on their innate talents and amazing perseverance and opportunities. Chu Chongqing was considered an outstanding expert. However, reaching this level, he felt a little bewildered and dispirited. If he hadn't had a chance to eat the roasted Taoyu's hoof, he didn't know how long it would take him to create the 8th step of the soul ladder. The 8 steps of the soul ladder had fused into one. The light it emitted was warm and comfortable. It shrouded people, giving them a comfortable feeling. The 8 steps of the soul ladder bloomed. From the 8th step of the soul ladder, a powerful soul energy shot down, shining on Chu Chongqing's glabella. Then, it slowly disappeared. Chu Chongqing's eyelids twitched. Slowly, he opened his eyes. Light seemed to move in his eyes. His spirit, qi, and soul had become completely different. Opening his mouth, Chu Chongqing exhaled a mouthful of murky air. He looked much younger now. Although he still had white hair and eyebrows, his eyes were sparkling. He was much more energetic than many young people. Chu Chongqing was really strong. At the divine soul realm with a 7-step soul ladder, he could fight against an expert with an 8-step soul ladder. Now, at the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder, he could compete with an almighty expert. Some monstrous talents could be called almighty at the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder because they could travel through the void. Boom! 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 Everyone started to retract their auras. Nangong Wuk opened his eyes, which were filled with excitement. His power had broken through, and it wasn't a small breakthrough. He had broken 4 of the Supreme Being's shackles. He just needed one more to reach the peak of divine physique echelon. His rate of improvement made him feel a little crazy. Today, he could be said to be the head of the Heavenly Mist City's #1 family. With his power, he could bring the Nangong family up easily. What a pity! Wanner isn't here. It's a pity to miss this chance. Nangong Wuk was a little upset. He should have brought Nangong Wan here today. Even if he used his toes to think, he knew that Bufang wouldn't sell the Taoya's meat. Thus, it was impossible for Nangong Wan to eat such delicious food that could help her break through again. Of course, he could shamelessly beg Bufang. However, he thought that with Bufang's character, only God knew if he would agree or not. Otherwise, why would he let one stick to Bufang? Nangong Wuk once again had the idea of becoming Bufang's brother-in-law. However, after thinking for a while, he glanced at the netherworld ship anchored under the path understanding tree and gave up. Luo Danqing had also broken through. Not only had his wounds healed, but his cultivation base had also broken through to the divine soul realm with a 4-step soul ladder. Yang Meiji and Sorceress and Sheng had also broken through. Their progress wasn't much different from Nangong Wuk's. When they opened their eyes, they were so happy. Essence energy gushed out of his mouth. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Bufang. He had to thank Bufang for this unexpected breakthrough. There was no doubt about it. However, since they had eaten, it was time to do some business. Chu Chongqing stood up, his eyes falling on the little girl Xiaoya by Bufang. Xiaoya had eaten a whole piece of Taoya's hoof, but she didn't show any sign of breaking through after half a year. This made the corners of Chu Chongqing's mouth twitch. Indeed, the Valley Master had placed that thing in the little girl's body. No wonder why the little girl could seal the black Taoya's soul with her body. Only the little girl, who had received that thing's nourishment, could resist the furious Taoya's soul and survive until now. Otherwise, this little girl would have been torn apart by the Taoya's soul. Not everybody was as monstrous as Bufang, who could easily subdue the Taoya's soul. The gap between a human's body and a spirit beast's was too big. Thank you for your hospitality, Owner Bu. However, I'm here this time to bring Xiaoya back to the Valley of Gluttony. Our Valley of Gluttony needs her, said Chu Chongqing, his eyes bright. Chapter 720. Chu Chongqing leisurely took out a coat from his spatial ring, putting it on. He indifferently lifted his head, his white hair and beard fluttering in the wind. His eyes fell on Bufang as he spoke. His voice was calm, but it was unquestionable. As he had broken through to the almighty realm, Chu Chongqing's aura had become much more dignified. Just looking at him gave people a heavy pressure. This time, I'm here to bring Xiaoya back to the Valley of Gluttony. Our Valley of Gluttony needs her, said Chu Chongqing. He was really grateful to Bufang for giving him a chance to break through. However, even if he had broken through, he still wanted to bring Xiaoya back, because this time, he was sure that the key to open the inheritance was with Xiaoya. As long as he brought Xiaoya back to the Valley of Gluttony, the inheritance would open, and Xiaoya would have a chance to inherit the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. On this point, Chu Chongqing wouldn't give in even the slightest bit. Bufang was a little skeptical, frowning as he listened to Chu Chongqing. His bandaged hand gently pressed on Xiaoya's head. The latter was also skeptical as she looked at Chu Chongqing. I'm not leaving. I want to stay here with Big Brother. Hearing that Chu Chongqing wanted to take her away, Xiaoya panicked. She turned around and hugged Bufang's thigh, shouting anxiously. Chu Chongqing was dumbstruck. Bufang's face was emotionless. This little girl was really calm when she hugged his thigh. Nangong Wuk couldn't stand it anymore. He said to Chu Chongqing, Sr., if Xiaoya likes to stay here, let her stay. She's just a kid. We shouldn't make things difficult for her. Shut up. Chu Chongqing indifferently turned his head to look at Nangong Wuk, speaking calmly. They didn't understand how important Xiaoya was to the Valley of Gluttony, although the Valley of Gluttony seemed to be bustling, and the Gluttony tablet was extremely prosperous, Chu Chongqing was the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony. However, as the great elder of the Valley of Gluttony, Chu Chongqing had always been able to see things clearly. That was because behind the Valley of Gluttony, there was a terrifying beast eyeing them like a tiger watching its prey. It could swallow the Valley of Gluttony at any time. That beast was none other than the hidden Dragon Royal Court's Holy Land. Not only the Heavenly Spring Holy Land, but the other Holy Lands also wanted a share of the Valley of Gluttony. What they wanted was the Valley of Gluttony's treasures and the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. It should be known that when the Valley of Gluttony was at its peak, it was stronger than the ordinary Holy Lands. Although it had declined, its inheritance was still very attractive. Chu Chongqing could not let the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance fall into the hands of those bastards from the royal court. So the little lass had to go with him. "You old geezer, this little girl has good food and drinks here. Why would she follow you to the Valley of Gluttony?" Nangong Wuk felt as though he had been slapped in the face. He curled his lips and said. Chu Chongqing squinted. His eyes raked through the area, and the terrifying pressure of an almighty instantly diffused. Nangong Wuk felt as if a heavy mountain was pressing down on his body, and he was unable to breathe. Do you mean that the little girl won't have good food and drinks in the Valley of Gluttony?" To tell you the truth, although this little chef's cooking skills aren't bad, in the Valley of Gluttony, he's just SOSO. He can't even enter the top 5. If the Valley of Gluttony was at its peak, this little chef, entering the top 50 of the Tablet of Gluttony, was just a pipe dream. Chu Chongqing said seriously. His voice was filled with pride for the Valley of Gluttony. It was true that Bufang's grilled Taoyes hoof had helped him break through and enter the almighty realm. However, it didn't mean that Bufang's cooking skills had reached the peak of the Valley of Gluttony. Bufang's cooking skills were just at the first-grade chef level. With Chu Chongqing's sharp eyes, of course, he could see that. And, in the Valley of Gluttony, there were some special-grade chefs, who were even better than Bufang. This time, he could cook the delicious grilled Taoyes hoof because of the top-grade ingredients. If he hadn't used the Taoyes hoof, this dish wouldn't have been able to tear his clothes. Nangong Wuk arched his brows. He gaped, looking at Chu Chongqing with an astonished face. He had never thought that this old man in front of him, who looked so simple and honest, he was so shameless. He dared to say that Old Boo's cooking skills weren't worth mentioning. Old Boo's cooking skills were the best chef Nangong Wuk had ever seen. This old man had eaten Old Boo's food, and his power had increased tremendously. However, he was still so pretentious. Really shameless. "I don't want to talk to you," Nangong Wuk snorted, turning his head away. Chu Chongqing rolled his eyes and looked at the little girl. He said indifferently, "Perhaps you don't know what your identity means. With your identity, your freedom doesn't belong to you anymore. If you didn't have the Black Taoyes soul sealed in your body, you would have been brought to the Gluttony God City. You were born to belong to the Gluttony God City," said Chu Chongqing. Xiao Ya's big eyes looked at Chu Chongqing. Then, she snorted and turned her head away, hugging Bufang's thigh. She didn't want to talk to Chu Chongqing. Cough cough, Chu Chongqing felt a little embarrassed. He had said it so bluntly, but this little girl still didn't give him face. Was it that hard to go back to the Valley of Gluttony with him? "You like to eat, don't you? There are so many chefs in the Valley of Gluttony. If they cook for you every day, they will definitely cook better food than this little chef," Chu Chongqing sighed. Eventually, he turned to Bufang. He thought that only Bufang could make the final decision. As soon as he lifted his head, he found that Bufang was in a daze. Bufang was indeed in a daze. That was because the serious voice of the system arose in his head. "The great elder of the Valley of Gluttony, Chu Chongqing, has questioned the host's cooking skills. Moreover, he looks down on you. As the host who wants to stand on the top of the food chain in this fantasy world, you must let him know that he has to pay a price for looking down on the future god of cooking. Temporary mission. Go to the Valley of Gluttony and challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Win their kitchen knives. The future god of cooking can't be humiliated. Mission reward. 4 symbols fire control skill. The system's notification made Bufang a little dumbstruck. He had just come back from the Valley of Gluttony. Why did he have to go there again? Moreover, it was even more ferocious this time. He wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony? Isn't it a little too exciting? The top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony were chefs at Wenrenshang's level? Moreover, he wanted to have a chef's challenge. To win, he had to take his opponent's kitchen knife? It was a little cruel. Bufang furrowed his brows. He felt that it wasn't right. Do you have to be so cruel? System. It was a chef's challenge. The loser would be deprived of his right to cook. Moreover, his kitchen knife would be taken away. To a chef, it was a devastating blow. Host, don't worry. The system has changed the rules of the chef's challenge. Even if you lose, your opponent won't be deprived of his right to cook. Moreover, they will have the chance to challenge you again to take back their kitchen knives, said the system seriously. Listening to it, Bufang exhaled in relief. So, it was like that. It was good then. However, the system's next words made Bufang's face stiffen. If the host fails in the chef's challenge, he will be deprived of his right to cook. Moreover, his god of cooking set and his cooking talent will be taken away. He will never be a chef again. The system's words were cold and indifferent. Bufang felt as if he had fallen into an icy sea. He almost suffocated, and he found it hard to breathe. If he failed in the chef's challenge, he would be deprived of his cooking talent and the god of cooking set? He would never be a chef again? Was that the price and punishment for failing? Bufang's eyes shrank. A moment later, he gasped for breath. His entire body was soaked in sweat. The system's purpose was to train him to be the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world. As a god of cooking, he was not allowed to fail in the chef's challenge. If it was before, the system wouldn't have asked Bufang to do that. However, after coming back from the Valley of Gluttony, Bufang's cooking talent was qualified, capable, and had the chance to defeat all the chefs in the Valley of Gluttony. That was why the system had given him such harsh requirements and punishment. Its purpose was to make Bufang cut off all means of retreat. As a god of cooking, he must have the determination to cut off all means of retreat. Bufang had heard from the tool spirits of the god of cooking set that the system had a host before. However, those hosts had all fallen at the last step. It meant that the path to becoming a god of cooking wasn't that simple and easy. At the thought of this, Bufang suddenly felt his body tremble. It was a feeling of restlessness and excitement, as if his cells were boiling under his skin. If that's the case, then I'll flatten everything. Nothing can stop me. Bufang let out a long breath and said with an expressionless face. However, there was an astonishing sharpness in his eyes. He liked the comfort of the restaurant, but he wouldn't let himself die prematurely on the path to becoming a god of cooking. Chu Chongsheng, who was standing in front of Bufang, was a little bit absent-minded. He could feel that Bufang had changed greatly, and this change made his heart jump. What happened? Why did this little chef's aura change so much in just a blink of an eye? That sharp feeling, that indomitable feeling, as if he wanted to break everything, made his heart beat faster. From Bufang, he could feel the aura of the former Valley Master of the Valley of Gluttony. How could it be? Bufang's eyes moved, his face emotionless as he looked at Chu Chongsheng. He patted Xiao Ye's head with his bandaged hand, making the latter lift her head to look at him. Do you want to take Xiao Ye back to the Valley of Gluttony? No problem. But you should go back first. 3 days later, I'll take Xiao Ye to the Valley of Gluttony myself. Chu Chongsheng was happy when he heard the first part of Bufang's words. However, the latter part surprised him. Why do you want to go to the Valley of Gluttony? Bufang's eyes were indifferent. His eyes raked through Chu Chongqing as he grinned. Don't you want to take Xiaoyu away? Simple. I'll go to the Valley of Gluttony to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. If someone defeats me, I won't say anything. But if no one defeats me, then what qualifications do you have to question my cooking skills? Bufang raised his head, indifferently glancing at Chu Chongqing. His domineering aura surged. Chapter 721. Bufang lifted his chin, looking at Chu Chongqing arrogantly. Bufang's words were sonorous and powerful, which made Chu Chongqing's eyes shrink. From a distance, Luo Danqing heard Bufang's words. He coughed, dropping his jaw. He was frightened. What did Bufang say? He wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony to the Valley of Gluttony alone? It was just a pipe dream. If Bufang could win one chef's challenge, he would be lucky. Did he know what it meant to defeat all 10 chefs in a chef's challenge? Did Bufang want to use his power to confront the Valley of Gluttony, the holy land of chefs with a long history? Arrogant. Conceited. Although Luo Danqing had just eaten Bufang's grilled taoyes hoof and broken through, he didn't think that Bufang had any hope. The top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony were all monstrous. Perhaps Bufang could fight against some of them. However, if he met the top 3, he would be crushed. The top 3 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony were all monstrous. It should be known that even Wenren Shang, a monstrous chef, was ranked after the top 5. And the top 3 were all special grade chef. Facing special grade chefs, what chance did Bufang have? That was why Luo Danqing said that Bufang was arrogant and conceited. Chu Chongqing's face didn't change much. He didn't expect that Bufang would propose such a method, which was like cutting off his way out. Chef's challenge. What did it mean? Once someone lost, he would be deprived of his right to cook. To a chef, it was too cruel. However, Bufang's conceit and arrogance made Chu Chongqing's anger rise. He felt that Bufang was looking down on their Valley of Gluttony. Why is there a need for a chef's challenge? It's not necessary to use your lifelong cooking skills to have a chef's challenge. Our relationship doesn't need to be so stiff. No matter what, you are a chef. If you lose and lose your right to cook, it will be a pity. Chu Chongqing said. Bufang gently patted Xiaoya's head. His eyes narrowed as he said indifferently, "You don't have to worry about it. The rules of the chef's challenge have been changed. Even if they lose, they won't be deprived of their right to cook. However, the kitchen knife will be mine. If they want it back, they can continue to challenge me," Bufang said. Chu Chongqing was bewildered. The rules were changed? This was the rule of the Valley of Gluttony. How could it be changed? Chu Chongqing was bewildered. Why did Bufang sound so calm when he said that? If I say it can be changed, it can be changed. You don't need to care about it. Just tell me. Do you agree or not? Bufang said indifferently, his face emotionless. Bufang's resolute face made Chu Chongqing take in a breath of cold air. The confidence on Bufang's face had deeply stimulated him. Okay, good. Then, I will wait for you in the Valley of Gluttony. If you don't come after 3 days, don't blame me for taking the little girl back to the Valley of Gluttony, said Chu Chongqing, clasping his hands. Up to you, said Bufang indifferently. Chu Chongqing looked at Bufang, then at Xiaoya and Lord Dog, who was snoring on the ground behind her. The corners of his mouth twitched, and his white beard shivered. He turned around, wanting to tear the void to get out of here. However, when he released his mental energy, he found that the void was impregnable, and he couldn't tear it. Chu Chongqing was bewildered, his face dumbstruck. How could it be? He had the power of an almighty. Why couldn't he tear the void to get back? Oh, I forgot to remind you that the restaurant is protected by an array. The void is very stable and cannot be torn. So, if you want to leave, please walk out of the restaurant first. Bufang seemed to remember something and reminded her. Chu Changxing's mouth twitched. Eventually, he swung his sleeves, walking out of the restaurant. Night had fallen outside the restaurant, and the restaurant was once again covered with a layer of cold frost. When he got out of the restaurant, Chu Changxing felt that his field of vision had widened a lot. Looking into the distance, Chu Changxing's eyes seemed to have energy moving. Boom! Rumble! Boom! A crack appeared in the void. Chu Changxing was satisfied. It was the right way to open the door. Then, he calmly stepped into the twisting space crack. Shortly after, the crack closed, and Chu Changxing disappeared into it. Only a gust of wind brushed past. Inside the cloud mist restaurant, Bufang rubbed the little girl's head. His indifferent eyes looked at the vanishing crack, his face emotionless. However, there was a faint flame burning in his eyes. Nothing can stop it. Luo Danqing carefully looked at Bufang. He stood up. The blood on his body was still scabbed. However, since he had eaten the Taoye's hoof, his wounds were all healed. He wanted to warn Bufang. Owner Bu, do you really want to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony alone? Facing his answer, Bufang's face didn't change. He just gave Luo Danqing a faint look. You've finished your food. You can leave now. Luo Danqing was bewildered. He didn't think that Bufang would ask him to leave. I don't need you to remind me. I won't change my decision. 3 days later, the chef's challenge will be held in the Valley of Gluttony. If you're interested, you can come to the Valley of Gluttony to cheer for me, Bufang said. Then, he turned around, walking to the kitchen. Luo Danqing gawked and dropped his jaw. He didn't know where Bufang got his confidence from. Who gave him such courage? Nangong Wuk shook his head, walking toward him. I just feel that old Bu's actions were very satisfying. That old man was too pretentious just now. He took advantage of me, but he still wanted to take my little Yaya away. If I had culinary skills, I would definitely have done the same thing just now and slapped him in the face. Nangong Wuk smacked his lips. Luo Danqing was speechless. He shook his head and didn't say anything. Then, he turned around and left the restaurant with Nangong Wuk. Yang Meiji and Sorceress and Sheng also wanted to leave. However, when Bufang reached the kitchen, he halted. With his back facing Yang Meiji and Sheng, he slowly tilted his head. You two, come in. Practice your cooking skills for 3 days of special training. Yang Meiji and Sheng, who were about to leave the restaurant, were stunned, dropping their jaws. They felt so innocent and wronged. You want to challenge the Valley of Gluttony. What does it have to do with us? Why do you need to train us? Yang Meiji and Sheng exchanged looks. They saw the reluctance in each other's eyes. Tonight, the Cloud Mist restaurant was brightly lit. The Glutton God's banquet of the Valley of Gluttony had ended. Everybody had left. The towering tablet of Gluttony in the center of the Gluttony Square had been updated. Many of the densely packed names on it had changed. However, the top 10 were still the same and there was not much change. Although there were many dark horses and some had accumulated a lot, it was really hard to defeat the monstrous chefs in the top 10 of the Tablet of Gluttony. Even the biggest dark horse of this year, Jun Qingshao, was defeated when he challenged the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. The gap between the two was really big. Buzz, the void twisted. Chu Changxing's figure slowly walked out of the void. He appeared on the calm Sunset Lake. At this moment, the Sunset Lake was a mess. The lakeside was full of broken rocks, and the small path had collapsed. It looked so pitiful. Above the Sunset Lake, the giant ancestral alligator had half of its head floating above the lake. Its big eyes blinked, looking satisfied. As soon as Chu Changxing appeared, his eyes fell on the Sunset Lake. Looking at the pitiful lake, he couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, the white Taotai had broken the seal, running to the Cloud Mist restaurant to cause a ruckus. However, it had lost its life in the end. It had become a dish on the plate, which was really pitiful. Chu Changxing's eyes were so stern as he scanned the area. The ancestral alligator seemed to feel Chu Changxing's eyes. It roared, and the sunset lake surged with waves. The ancestral alligator jumped up from the lake, opening its mouth and showing a ferocious face. However, Chu Changxing just coldly looked at him. His majestic aura diffused from his body. A moment later, the furious ancestral alligator stopped roaring. It dove back into the lake, diving deeper and deeper. It didn't even dare to let out a fart. That evil beast! Chu Changxing muttered faintly. A moment later, he stepped out, entering the glutton god city as if he had shrunk the ground. At this moment, the sixth elder was leisurely lying on a chair with his handlebar mustache. He was happily enjoying the wind blowing against him. The glutton god's banquet was over. The glutton god's banquet that he had hosted was over. It was rare for him to have a good rest, so he looked relaxed. All of a sudden, he squinted and saw a figure dashing through the air from a distance. In just a blink of an eye, he appeared in front of him. So familiar. Great Elder! The sixth elder was bewildered. He was startled, jolting up from his seat. Chu Changxing appeared in front of the sixth elder like a gust of wind. The aura he had used to deal with the ancestral alligator hadn't disappeared yet. Thus, the sixth elder felt a pressure on his chest. Great Elder! You! The sixth elder's face changed. He was a little skeptical and happy at the same time. This aura was so terrifying. Looking at the void around Chu Changxing, which was about to shatter, you've broken through? You're an almighty now? The sixth elder's eyes shrank. A moment later, he screamed excitedly. After so many years, besides the Valley Master, the Valley of Gluttony finally had another almighty expert. He didn't expect that Chu Changxing would break through after leaving the Valley of Gluttony for a while. It was a pleasant surprise. With Chu Changxing's breakthrough, the Valley of Gluttony would have more confidence. The experts from the Holy Lands wouldn't dare to act rashly in the Valley of Gluttony anymore. However, contrary to the sixth elder's joy, Chu Changxing didn't feel happy at all. Even though he had broken through to the almighty realm, he still felt a sense of danger. It was because he understood clearly that they were still too weak in front of the Holy Lands. Once the Divine Spirit Realm experts of the Holy Lands took action, even if they were just ordinary Divine Spirit Realm experts, they wouldn't need to be at the sect master level to destroy the Valley of Gluttony. Chu Changxing landed, indifferently glancing at the sixth elder. That pressure made the sixth elder's handlebar mustache curl. The glutton god's banquet is over? The ranking battle is over too? Asked Chu Changxing. Yeah. The ranking battle of the Tablet of Gluttony is over too. The top 10 haven't changed much. This time we have a lot of good seedlings. Hearing that, the sixth elder became excited. He wanted to say something, but Chu Changxing waved his hand to stop him. You don't need to talk about useless things. Now, you call the top 10 kids of the Tablet of Gluttony. I want to give them special training. The sixth elder was bewildered. What happened? Chu Changxing's eyes sparkled. After 3 days, they will have a chef's challenge. Chef's challenge? The sixth elder was bewildered. Yeah, it's a chef's challenge. A savage kid wants to challenge the top 10 of our Tablet of Gluttony. So, I have to train those kids well. At that time, I'll teach that kid how to behave. Chapter 7:22. The sixth elder was bewildered. Chu Changxing's words had baffled him. What did he mean by that arrogant kid wants to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony? Did that kid have a problem with his brain? Or did his head get squeezed by a door? Even if he was really good, it was okay if he challenged one chef to a chef's challenge, but now, he challenged 10 chefs to a chef's challenge. Did he look down on the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony or the Valley of Gluttony? The Valley of Gluttony was the holy land of chefs in the entire Hidden Dragon continent. They had the best chefs on the continent, and the top 3 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony were all special grade chefs. It was really difficult to challenge one of them, let alone all of them. Moreover, they wanted to use the cruelest chef's challenge. Once they failed, there was no way out. That kid was so confident that he could win all of them? Thus, the sixth elder thought that Chu Chongqing was just trying to scare them. How could such an awesome chef exist in this continent? Even if Yen Yu, the current first-rank chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, challenged the top 10 chefs to a chef's challenge, he couldn't do it. It was because each chef's challenge required a lot of effort. Even the special grade chef, Yen Yu, couldn't do it. If even the first-rank chef of the Tablet of Gluttony couldn't do it, how could the others do it? All of a sudden, the sixth elder's eyes widened. Looking at Chu Chongqing's face, a figure emerged in his head. It couldn't be. The little fellow Chu Chongqing mentioned. Could it be Bufang, that little chef? The sixth elder recognized Bufang. Not only did he recognize him, but even if Bufang turned into ashes, he would still recognize him. It was because Bufang had swallowed the heaven and earth obsidian flame that he had kept for many years. Even if he was beaten to death, he would remember Bufang. If it was that kid who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, he could have done such a ridiculous thing. Anyway, although that kid's cooking talent wasn't bad, his cooking level was still far from the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. If it was really that brat, then there was no doubt that he was looking for a beating. You don't need to think too much. Go and call Yen Yu and the others. Even if the opponent is really weak and arrogant, we can't afford to lose in this chef's challenge. This concerns the future of the Valley of Gluttony, Chu Chongqing said seriously. The sixth elder's face shivered. Since Chu Chongqing was so serious, it seemed this matter was really important. Thus, the sixth elder didn't ask anything more. He stood up and disappeared from Chu Chongqing's sight. Glutton God City, Noodle King Restaurant. Ouyang Chunfeng was sitting in his own noodle shop, drinking wine and eating shaved noodles that he had just made. It was extremely chewy, and the entrance was like a spring knocking against the walls of his mouth, giving him endless enjoyment. This knife-shaved noodle was the dish that Bufang had cooked. Ouyang Chunfeng had learned it after seeing it once. The Noodle King, who ranked 10th on the Tablet of Gluttony, had a profound understanding of noodles that ordinary people couldn't compare to. All of a sudden, Ouyang Chunfeng was bewildered. He lifted his head to look at the door, where a familiar figure was slowly walking toward him. It was the sixth elder. When the sixth elder saw Ouyang Chunfeng, he didn't say anything. He just gave him a gentle nod and said, "Hurry to the Gluttony Square. The great elder has something to tell you." Ouyang Chunfeng's face stiffened. Since the sixth elder had been sent to inform him, it seemed like it wasn't a trivial matter. "Go now." Ouyang Chunfeng clasped his hands at the sixth elder. A moment later, he rolled up his chef robe, downed his wine, and took a bite of his knife-shaved noodle. Then, he strode out of the noodle shop. Noodle King Ouyang Chunfeng, who ranked 10th on the Tablet of Gluttony, had arrived. Inside a dilapidated bamboo house, the sixth elder slowly walked in. As soon as he pushed the door open, bamboo leaves rustled and fell from the bamboo forest. The leaves fluttered, flying, and scattered on the ground. "Sixth elder, how come you have the leisure to visit my small bamboo house today?" Inside the bamboo house, a young man wearing a bamboo hat and a straw raincoat was smiling at the sixth elder. He was carrying a bamboo basket on his back. In one hand, he held a hoe that was still stained with fresh soil. In the other, he held a bamboo shoot that was glistening like a dazzling gem. The bamboo shoot still had water droplets moving on it. It was crystal clear, too beautiful to behold. "The great elder has something urgent to tell you. Please hurry to the Gluttony Square," said the sixth elder. The young man was bewildered. Then, he clasped his hands respectfully. The 9th chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, Jade Bamboo Shoot Wang Tong, had arrived. By the Sunset Lake, there was a small, leisurely house by the lake. Squeak! The door of the small house was pushed open. 3 cute kids ran out of the house, laughing and playing. The sixth elder wore a smile on his face, signaling them to be careful. After the little fellows made faces at the sixth elder, they began to run forward and continued to play. The sixth elder entered the small house. Inside the house, a beautiful woman was preparing steaming hot dishes. Seeing the sixth elder, she hurried to greet him. "Mrs. Zhou, sorry to disturb you. Could you tell me where Zhou Qing is now?" asked the sixth elder. The beautiful woman was bewildered. Then, she said, "My husband is fishing by the Sunset Lake. He's studying the new dish." The sixth elder nodded. "When Zhou Qing comes back, please tell him to hurry to the Gluttony Square. The great elder has something important to tell him." Then, the sixth elder turned around and left. In just a short time, the sixth elder had run around the entire Gluttony God City. It was because the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony were all eccentric. They had amazing cooking skills, but they were also arrogant. Some people liked to cook meat ingredients, while some people only liked to cook ingredients with the spirit of heaven and earth. They all had different styles. Of course, there were some chefs like Wenren Shang, but they were rare. After gathering all of the chefs, the sixth elder was also extremely tired. Luckily, Chu Chongqing's fame was big enough. When they knew that Chu Chongqing had summoned them, they didn't hesitate. They all came personally. The majestic Gluttony Gods building had gone through a big battle, but it was still as sturdy as before. The formation on the building had been repaired for a long time, and it was working again to protect the Gluttony Gods building. In the square of the Gluttony Gods building, the broken square had been repaired with new bricks and stones. In the center of the Gluttony Gods building was a figure wearing a coat. He stood there as if he could connect the sky and the earth. When Ouyang Chunfeng and the others arrived, they saw Chu Chongqing from a distance. At first glance, they felt a tremendous pressure. That pressure made them shiver in fear. He was worthy of being the great elder, the pillar of the Valley of Gluttony. Ouyang Chunfeng was the first one to arrive. After him, a man wearing a bamboo hat and straw sandals strode over with a smile on his face. He carried a bamboo basket on his back. Behind this man was another man wearing a conical bamboo hat and carrying a fish basket. Ouyang Chunfeng seemed to be familiar with them. They nodded to greet each other. When Ren Shang came, his body reeking of alcohol. While walking, he gulped down wine. There was also a chubby man. He was holding a piece of raw meat in his hand, chewing it unceasingly. His eyes squinted as if he was happy. As time flew, the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony arrived one by one. The sixth elder came with 3 Taoists. The 3 of them had different auras. Yen Yu, the current number 1 chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, was one of them. Behind Yen Yu there were 2 figures. One of them was a dark-skinned man wrapped in a black cloak. The other one was a graceful lady with a head full of purple hair. She had a towering chest, and although she wasn't extremely beautiful, she had a certain charm to her. She attracted many people's gazes and attracted many people's attention. These 3 chefs were the top 3 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. First place, Yen Yu. Second place, Mu Qing. Third place, Lu Jelly. The 3 of them had different auras because they were special grade chefs, which had been certified by the great elder and many elders of the Valley of Gluttony. Their culinary skills were really amazing, and they all had good dishes. Finally, the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony had gathered. They looked at Chu Chongqing, whose back was facing them. He was like a majestic mountain, and their eyes were filled with doubt. They didn't know why the great elder had asked them to come here. After a while, Chu Chongqing slowly turned around, his face extremely solemn. "After 3 days, you will face a brutal chef's challenge." Chu Chongqing looked at them, speaking. Many people were bewildered. A moment later, they couldn't help but laugh. Chef's challenge? In the Valley of Gluttony, who dared to challenge them? However, shortly after, the smiles on their faces vanished. Chu Chongqing's face was stern, and he didn't look like he was joking. Someone dared to challenge them? Moreover, it was all of them? Including the 3 monstrous chefs in the top 3? Thinking about that, many people arched their brows in surprise. When Ren Xiang poured a mouthful of wine into his mouth, his face reddened as he raised his hand, exhaling the smell of alcohol. Sir, can I refuse the chef's challenge? I don't want to have a meaningless chef's challenge. Chu Chongqing gave him a faint look. No. If the challenger chooses you, you must agree. You can't refuse. The outcome of the chef's challenge concerns the future of the Valley of Gluttony. Chu Chongqing's voice was so serious and heavy. Everybody shivered. They couldn't help but become solemn. When Ren Xiang smacked his lips, but he didn't say anything. I know what you're thinking right now. You think that your contestant is crazy, right? But I don't care what you think, and I don't care whether your contestant is crazy or not. I just need you to kill him. You must kill him. Because only by killing him can the Valley of Gluttony have a future. Great Elder, don't worry. I will absolutely make that arrogant challenger despair, said Yin Yu, taking a step forward. Chu Chongqing's eyes were like lightning. What I need is 100%. There can't be any mistake. So, in the next 3 days I will give you special training. To ensure the victory of the chef's challenge in 3 days. Special training? Everybody was in an uproar. Chefs at their level still needed special training? Was the great elder looking down on them? Or was he just joking? The road of gluttony has opened. You can enter now. 3 days later, it will be time for you to show your real skills, said Chu Chongqing in a low voice. Everybody was bewildered. Road of gluttony? That extremely dangerous road of gluttony? Everybody took in a breath of cold air. Was this the so-called special training? 3 days later. Beat up that arrogant kid for me. Heavenly Mist City, Cloud Mist Restaurant. 3 days passed slowly. During these 3 days, Bufang was still open for business. In this big world, business was the biggest because business earned cultivation base. However, late at night, Bufang would seriously practice his cooking skills. Not only did he cultivate, but he also invited Yang Meiji and Sorceress and Xing to do special training. In these 3 days, their culinary skills had improved at a godly speed. Even they themselves felt that it was somewhat inconceivable, and when they saw Bufang's training, they couldn't help but click their tongues. Finally, they knew why Owner Bu's cooking skills were so intimidating. It was because he didn't forget to practice at all times. He wouldn't let his cooking skills get rusty. Soon, the 3rd day arrived. Opening the bronze door of the restaurant, the warm autumn sunlight shone through the door. It shone on Bufang's body. Today's business continued, but the chef wasn't Bufang. It was Yang Meiji and Xing. After 3 days of special training, Bufang had taught them how to cook many dishes in the restaurant. Their skills weren't weaker than Bufang's, so they could sell them now. And Bufang had to bring Xiaoye to the Valley of Gluttony to fulfill the 3-day promise. Systems mission: Chef's challenge against the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. This was the most difficult ad hoc mission he had ever encountered. It was also the most challenging one. Every cell in Bufang's body seemed to be shivering. He patted the little girl's head, lifting his head, his eyes firm and resolute. Behind him, Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled as he stood tall and straight. The teleportation formation above his head moved. Shortly after, it was completed. The wind howled, and the teleportation began, entering the Valley of Gluttony for the 2nd time. Chapter 723. Xiaoye hugged Bufang's thigh tightly. The two of them and the puppet stood in the middle of the formation, enduring the howling gale of the formation. Then, they started the teleportation. Bufang had said that 3 days later, he would bring Xiaoye to the Valley of Gluttony. Hence, this time, Bufang did bring Xiaoye. Originally, Bufang came here to complete his mission. He brought Xiaoye because of his promise with Chu Chongqing. The wind howled, rolling up the fallen leaves on the ground. By the sunset lake specks of white light appeared, and in the next moment, a formation appeared in the void. The formation rotated, and within it, 3 figures were faintly discernible. Xiao Ya's figure was petite, Bufang's figure was slender, and White Yi's body was huge and fat. Oh, there was a xiaopi above Xiao Bai's head, spitting bubbles. The magic array dispersed, and the gale gradually disappeared. Bufang pulled Xiao Ya, and the 2 of them stood by the sunset lake. Behind them was the chubby Whitey. The sun shone brightly from the sky, shining on the sparkling sunset lake. It made the radiance look like crushed gold, speckling on the surface of the lake. The wind blew over the lake, bringing with it plenty of water vapor. Swish! The water of the sunset lake overflowed. Then, a giant head emerged from the lake. Gulp! Gulp! Bubbles surged. Its head was quite large, and its eyes were sharp. Its pupils were like sharp scimitars. It was the ancestral alligator hiding in the sunset lake. The white tautai, which had been sealed in the sunset lake, had run away. Today it was the boss of this lake. It stood on the top of the food chain, and it could do whatever it wanted. It saw Bufang, that familiar kid, roar. The ancestral alligator opened its mouth. The lake water surged, bursting with a roar as if it was demonstrating its power. Bufang glanced at the huge head in the sunset lake, and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. If the white Taoya's meat was so delicious, then the ancestral alligator's meat wouldn't be any worse, right? Bufang thought. In the next moment, his arm that was wrapped in black and white bandages suddenly emitted a powerful aura. The moment this aura spread out, the ancestral alligator shivered. It spat out a bubble, then quietly sank back into the lake. "You can't see me! You can't see me!" This must be the ancestral alligator's monologue at this moment. After all, Bufang had fused with the black and white Taoya's energy. Naturally, his body was tainted with the white Taoya's aura that had suppressed the ancestral alligator for countless years. Facing this familiar aura, the ancestral alligator didn't dare to move recklessly. He didn't dare to move recklessly either. The white Taotai was terrifying. What if he was eaten? Therefore, the ancestral crocodile dived into the water without saying a word. Bufang couldn't be bothered with it. He patted Xiao Ya's head, walking toward the Gluttony God City. Today, he came here to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Thus, he didn't want to deal with other things. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled, following Bufang. Shortly, they arrived at the Gluttony God City. After the previous war, the Gluttony God City's defense had become stronger. Many guards were walking back and forth on the city wall. When those guards saw Bufang, many of them were bewildered. A moment later, many of them stepped forward, trying to stop Bufang. The leader wore a set of armor, squinting as he walked toward Bufang. Bufang's face was indifferent. He held Xiao Ya's hand, but he didn't stop, continuing to move forward. That guard's eyes widened and he was enraged. However, before he could berate, an aged voice rang out beside his ear, causing him to be slightly stunned. "Great Elder!" The guard was bewildered. "Don't stop him. Let him in." Chu Chongqing's voice was hoarse and vague, but it sounded like thunder in the guard's ears, making his heart shiver. Without a doubt, Bufang was allowed to enter the Gluttony God City with Xiao Ya. The Gluttony God City was still as prosperous as before. Although she had been here before, Xiao Ya was still attracted by the dazzling array of goods and food. Bufang didn't stop. He brought Xiao Ya to the Gluttony Gods building. This time, the chef's challenge would be held in that building. On the Gluttony Gods' square road of gluttony, a crack appeared in the void. Then, from the crack, figures slowly walked out one after another. Yen Yu was the first one to walk out. He didn't look any different from before. To many people, the road of gluttony was a life-and-death challenge. To him, it was as easy as playing. Mu Cheng, Lu Jieli, and the others followed behind him. Although it had only been 3 days, the aura on their bodies had undergone tremendous changes. At the very least, they gave off a completely different feeling from the previous laziness that they gave off. When the last person walked out of the crack, Chu Chongqing's eyes shrank. That person's long hair was disheveled, and his eyes were indifferent. His aura was majestic. As soon as he walked out of the crack, he saw Chu Chongqing. The corners of his mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. When Rinzhou, Chu Chongqing was silent. He always thought that when Rinzhou had died in the road of gluttony. He didn't expect that when Rinzhou could walk out of it. Moreover, from his appearance, it seemed that he had obtained some benefits from heaven and earth. He must have made great progress. Teacher, I'm out. When Rinzhou looked at Chu Chongqing, speaking hoarsely. His voice was as hoarse as grinding stone, which made people's hearts tremble. Chu Chongqing sighed inwardly. Then, a bright light flashed in his eyes. I didn't expect that you could walk out. Good. Didn't you say that you wanted to defeat the one who defeated you in the chef's challenge? Today your chance has come, Chu Chongqing said calmly. When Rinzhou's lifeless eyes moved slightly. In the next moment, he revealed a crazed look. I will defeat him. When Rinzhou roared as he grabbed his head. His lifeless eyes suddenly turned into madness. I'll give you this chance. Follow the others, said Chu Chongqing. Then, everybody turned around, walking towards the gluttony light. After walking for a while, they reached the gluttony square. The road of gluttony wasn't far from the gluttony square. When they reached the square, Bufang hadn't arrived yet. After they arrived, they didn't say anything. After experiencing the road of gluttony, they finally knew what was called difficulty. These 3 days of special training were a spiritual baptism for them. That arrogant little chef hasn't arrived yet? When Renshang was a little impatient. When he walked out of the Gluttonous Immortals restaurant, he was the one who had changed the least. He was still reeking of alcohol, and he was still unrestrained. Chu Chongqing gave him a faint look, but he didn't say anything. All of a sudden, everybody looked at the entrance of the Gluttony Square. There, the big gate of the Gluttony Square slowly opened, making heavy squeaking noises. The sunlight shone through the big gate. As far as everyone could see, they could only see 3 pitch-black figures. Their shadows were elongated by the sunlight. In the tranquil environment, the faint sound of footsteps resounded and lingered in everyone's ears. Everyone's spirits were lifted, and their gazes became extremely sharp as they stared straight at the source of the voice. That arrogant fellow who wanted to challenge the 10 of them in the chef's challenge had finally appeared? After their eyes got used to the sunlight, they finally saw the 3 figures. A little girl, a skinny young man, and a chubby iron puppet. This strange combination caused everyone's gaze to turn strange. They had thought that they would see a chef with a strong aura. However, who would have thought that the one in front of them was a familiar figure? Wasn't he the dark horse chef who had competed against one Rinshang at the Glutton God's banquet? At that time, the competition between one Rinshang and that little chef had stirred up a big commotion. Many people were astounded by Bufang's cooking skills. How could it be him? Ouyang Qinfeng was also shocked. He didn't think that it was Bufang. It was because he had never thought that the chef who wanted to challenge the top 10 of the Tablet of Gluttony was none other than Bufang. Phew! With Bufang's competence, it wasn't enough. It was true that Bufang's cooking skills weren't bad, but he could be considered good among the first-grade chefs. He couldn't even be considered as the top chef. Even the top first-grade chefs like Zhou Qing were more than enough to deal with Bufang. This kid had chosen the chef's challenge. He was courting death. When Renshang's eyes focused, the bottle of wine he was about to pour into his mouth froze. His brows arched as he looked skeptical. It was that kid, interesting. When Renshang's mouth curved, he burst out laughing, gulping several mouthfuls of wine. Yen Yu's eyes slightly narrowed, landing on Bufang's body. It's this kid, he sneered. That kid didn't give him any face. This time, he would teach him a good lesson in this chef's challenge. However, whether that kid could endure until the chef's challenge was still a problem. When the 6th elder saw Bufang, he couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, it was that kid. A moment later, his eyes burned. That kid had swallowed his heaven and earth obsidian flame. When Rincho stood in the crowd, gazing at Bufang. He didn't say anything, but his breathing became heavy, and his eyes were bloodshot. Chu Chongqing indifferently looked at Bufang. Bufang pulled Xiaoya, standing not far from Chu Chongqing's team. They seemed to be confronting each other. However, in the eyes of ordinary people, his aura was too weak. Compared to Hao Yu, who was one of the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony, Bufang's aura was like a firefly. Hao Yu's pressure was about to disperse it. "You're here," Chu Chongqing said indifferently. "I said I would come. I hope the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony won't disappoint me." Bufang wore the vermilion robe. Under the pressure, the striped red and white vermilion robe slowly fluttered. A moment later, a wave of aura rose from Bufang's body. His aura was like a raging flame, rising higher and higher. Boom! Green smoke fumed from Bufang's hand. A moment later, the golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand, and he rested it on his shoulder. Bufang looked at the crowd, speaking indifferently. "Come. Who dares to be the first one to challenge me?" Chapter 724. Bufang's eyes were indifferent. He held the dragon bone kitchen knife, which had become like a machete because he had filled it with true energy. His eyes scanned the entire place, his voice cold and brimming with confidence. Bufang's arrogant attitude had dumbfounded the audience. They couldn't believe their eyes. This kid wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony alone? That was a little too arrogant. Arrogant? Bufang shook his head indifferently. He didn't think he was arrogant at all. As a god of cooking who wanted to stand at the top of the food chain in this fantasy world, if he didn't even have this little bit of courage, what qualifications did he have to talk about becoming the god of cooking? Compared to Bufang's arrogance, many people from the Valley of Gluttony were enraged by Bufang's arrogance. However, no matter how angry they were, no one stood up. If they did, they would have to face a chef's challenge. As chefs from the Valley of Gluttony, they weren't unfamiliar with chef's challenges. It was a competition where their future depended on it. Of course, they didn't dare to be careless. No one wanted to be the first to stand out. Of course, some people didn't want to take action. Yen Yu squinted, his handsome face wearing a mocking smile. He was a special grade chef, and he was very confident in his talent. He was the first chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, and his cooking level wasn't something that this little chef in front of him could compare to. He didn't want to have a chef's challenge with Bufang. If the Great Elder hadn't insisted, he wouldn't have appeared in this chef's challenge. Mu Cheng, the second chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, was also extremely talented. She was the only woman among the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. However, she had suppressed many chefs to take the second place. Although she wasn't extremely beautiful, she had the charm of a mature woman. She looked at Bufang, pursing her red lips. She didn't say anything, but her eyes had a hint of ridicule. It was the first time she had met someone who dared to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. She was a little curious. After Bufang spoke, there was a long silence. Everyone was whispering to each other and did not pay attention to Bufang. Ouyang Chunfeng was a little disappointed. He didn't understand why Bufang would come here to have a chef's challenge. Although this kid's cooking skills were not bad and he could make good noodles, he had almost defeated Wenren Shang at the Glutton God's banquet. However, Wenren Shang hadn't used his full strength that time. Bufang frowned. This group of people really didn't intend to make a move? I'll do it. If you won't do it, then I'll do it. I want revenge. I want revenge. Just as the 10 chefs were hesitating, a crazy roar suddenly came from the crowd. Everyone was taken aback. Shifting their gazes, they saw Wenrencho, whose face was filled with madness. Wenrencho's hair was disheveled, his bloodshot eyes gazing at Bufang. He walked out of the crowd, grinning and releasing an aura like a venomous snake. Bufang's first chef's challenge was against Wen Rinzhou. After Wen Rinzhou lost, his knife was taken away, and he lost his right to cook. Chu Chongqing had helped him remove the oath of gluttony and made him remember his humiliation. He had to enter the road of gluttony to cultivate his cooking skills. Today, he had walked out of the road of gluttony with the 10 chefs. No one knew what level his cooking skills had reached. Even Chu Chongqing didn't know. As soon as he got out of the road of gluttony, he saw Bufang. It wasn't hard to imagine how excited Wen Rinzhou was. Wen Rinzhou could endure so many hardships on the road of gluttony, which had buried so many white bones. He had relied on his will to take revenge. Just like what he had said, he wanted revenge. He wanted to erase his humiliation. No one had thought that Wen Rinzhou would jump out first. It was good. Let Wen Rinzhou test this kid's skills. After getting out of the road of gluttony, Wen Rinzhou's cooking skills had reached a pretty good level among first-grade chefs. Although he couldn't be ranked in the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony, he was qualified to challenge it. Bufang shouldered the dragon bone kitchen knife. His indifferent eyes turned to Wen Rinzhou. Wen Rinzhou's helter-skelter appearance and savage eyes made him frown. What's your ranking on the tablet of gluttony? Bufang asked, his face emotionless. Everybody was bewildered. Wen Rinzhou was also bewildered. A moment later, his face became ferocious. Owner Bu, don't tell me you've forgotten me. I can't forget you. Although I'm not on the tablet of gluttony, my competence won't disappoint you. Wen Rinzhou was excited. He stuck out his scarlet tongue, licking his red lip. His eyes gazed at Bufang with incomparable enthusiasm. Come. If they don't want to compete with you, I will. You're not in the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth, glancing at Wen Rinzhou. You're not in the top 10. I don't want to have a chef's challenge with you. You're not qualified, Bufang said casually. Hearing that, everybody was bewildered. Wen Rinzhou's excited face froze on the spot. A moment later, his face became ferocious. Why do you look down on me? Do you know what I've gone through to defeat you? Wen Rinzhou roared crazily. But you're not in the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony, said Bufang, his face emotionless. Wen Rinzhou almost went crazy. Bufang didn't accept his challenge because he wasn't in the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony. He had missed the Glutton God's banquet. If he wanted to challenge the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony, he would have to wait for a long time. Wen Rinzhou couldn't wait that long. The chefs of the Valley of Gluttony couldn't help but frown. Ouyang Qinfeng's eyes darkened. It seemed that Bufang was really determined to have a chef's challenge. If that was the case, Ouyang Qinfeng took a step forward, looking at Bufang with a serious face. It's not impossible to have a chef's challenge, but you need to show us that you're qualified to have a chef's challenge with us. So, you need to show us your competence. Defeating Wen Rinzhou is your chance to do so. Ouyang Qinfeng said. That's right. Standing far from them, Chu Chongqing, whose aura was incomparably condensed, rubbed his white beard and nodded, showing his agreement. Yan Yu looked at Bufang with a face full of ridicule. Mu Qing was the same. As the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony, they had their own pride. Each of them was a peerless genius of the Valley of Gluttony. They were the top chefs, so how could they have a chef's challenge? Lu Jelly was a tall, dark-skinned man. He had yellow hair, which was tied up. He wore a black chef robe, and his aura was somewhat aloof. He was ranked 3rd on the tablet of gluttony, and his culinary skills were exquisite. His deep eyes looked at Bufang. At this moment, almost every chef looked at Bufang with the same gaze. He wanted to challenge them. Bufang also needed to show them his competence. Otherwise, where would they waste their time to have a chef's challenge with a little chef? Come! Wen Rinzhou opened his mouth and exhaled. His eyes were filled with insanity. The chef's challenge with Bufang had become his obsession. This time, He must defeat Bufang and wash away that humiliation. Bufang's face was indifferent. He scanned the crowd, and he realized that everyone's eyes were filled with ridicule and expectation. So, he knew that if he wanted to have a chef's challenge with these chefs, he must first defeat this crazy Wenrinchou. Since that was the case, then come. Finish it quickly. I'm in a hurry. Bufang glanced at Wenrinchou. He flicked his finger, and the dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand again. The first chef's challenge is you. The kitchen knife spun in Bufang's hand. The golden light gradually dimmed, and it turned into a pitch-black ancient dragon bone kitchen knife. He held the knife horizontally, pointing it at Wenrinchou. Wenrinchou's eyes widened. The corners of his mouth cracked, revealing a crazy smile. He grabbed his fluffy hair and suddenly let out a long laugh. Come on. I've been hungry for a long time. Buzz, the red light in Wenrinchou's eyes brightened. In the next moment, a knife light flashed, tearing the air. A slender, silver-white kitchen knife appeared in Wenrinchou's hand. The knife was silver-white and shiny. The surface of the knife was so smooth that it could clearly reflect the chef's face. The tip of the knife flashed like starlight, and the clanging sound reverberated unceasingly. This is the famous knife that I got after going through many hardships in the road of gluttony. The snake beheading. This time, I'm using the snake beheading to smash my humiliation. Wenrinchou laughed. The knife spun and the knife light shot everywhere. When the others heard Wenrinchou's words, they all took in a breath of cold air. This fellow actually got a blessing in disguise. He got a famous knife in the road of gluttony. His luck was too good. The entire Valley of Gluttony only had 10 famous knives. Even the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony only had 5. Chu Chongqing had 1, the Valley Master had 1, and the other 3 were lost in the road of gluttony. The lucky ones could get them. No one expected that the god of luck would fall on Wenrinchou's head, and this loser got it. With the help of the famous knife, Wenrinchou's cooking skills were basically at the level of the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Alright, don't talk nonsense. Since it's you, let's start, said Bufang. Bufang wasn't afraid of showing off his kitchen knife. The dragon bone kitchen knife of the god of cooking set was enough to crush any so-called famous knife. Alright, since both sides have agreed, the first chef's challenge will start in 1 hour. This time, the theme of the chef's challenge is fish. Chu Chongqing glanced at the two of them. Then, his gaze landed on Wenrinchou as he said calmly, That's right. Wenrinchou shivered. The theme is fish? Previously, the theme of the chef's challenge between him and Bufang was fish, and he had lost that battle. Chu Chongqing wanted to help him wash away the obsession in his heart. Only then could he win and wash away his obsession completely. Bufang looked at Chu Chongqing, twitching his mouth. Of course, he knew what this old fellow was thinking, but he didn't refuse. Just like what he had said, he was fearless. Nothing could stop him. Now you have the time to brew a pot of tea, to think about your dish, and tell me the ingredients you need. After 1 hour, the chef's challenge will officially begin, Chu Chongqing said. Then, his thought flickered. A moment later, the entire Glutton Gods building shook hard. Rumble. The arena split apart, revealing 2 exquisite stoves. The tightly closed windows of the Glutton Gods building opened. Many people in the Glutton Gods city were bewildered. A moment later, they looked surprised. Someone was going to have a chef's challenge in the Glutton Gods building? After a moment of astonishment, they were thrilled, dashing toward the Glutton Gods building. After 1 hour, the entire Glutton Gods building was crowded, and it was as lively as the Glutton Gods banquet. It wasn't because of anything else, but because the news that Bufang wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony had spread like wildfire. Thus, the crowd had surrounded the Glutton Gods building. An hour had already passed. Bufang and Wenrinchou came to their own stoves. After they had informed Chu Chongqing about the ingredients they needed, They had all been delivered to them. Dong! A bell rang. Chu Changxing's eyes were like lightning as he officially announced the start of the chef's challenge. Swish! Bufang's face was calm, while Wen Rincho's face was crazy. Both of them pulled open the cloth wrapping their ingredient. Instantly, the fish they had chosen were revealed. Chapter 725. The netherworld. Inside a canyon that seemed to be slashed by a powerful blade energy, a towering, ferocious palace suddenly stood upright. The corners of the palace were distinct, and the ice-cold iron pillars were like swords of slaughter that pierced into the sky. The pillars were connected by heavy and ice-cold iron chains. This was the Hades Palace, which was located in a corner of the netherworld. The Hades Palace was very cold and deserted. The heavy metal door of the main hall was slowly pushed open, emitting a heavy creaking sound. A clear and cold light shone in from outside, shining on the ground, speckled like crushed gold. Tai, who had a head full of white hair and looked like a child, carefully stepped into the palace with a plate of washed spirit fruits. He slowly walked towards the high seat, where a dignified figure was sitting. "Lord Hades, I've brought you something to eat." Tai held the spirit fruits, respectfully talking to Hades, who had his back facing him. Ever since Hades had returned to the netherworld, he had been depressed. Tai was also anxious, trying to find ways to make Hades happy. Although there were only him and Hades in the vast Hades Palace, as Hades' servant, Tai, he had the obligation to make Hades happy. After calling for a while, Hades didn't answer him, which made Tai's heart skip a beat. "Lord Hades!" Tai continued to call. However, Hades still didn't answer him. Tai was a little anxious. He lifted his head, holding the plate full of spirit fruits, and ran to the high seat. Light suddenly shone. A moment later, Tai's face turned ashen. He covered his face, his mouth gaping, and the spirit fruits fell to the ground. "My Lord Hades! Where is he?" Tai was dumbfounded. On the throne was a metallic puppet wearing black armor. The puppet had a smiling face on its face, and its head was shaking left and right. Looking at that funny smiling face, Tai had a constipated expression. He knew that his Lord Hades had left again. Meanwhile, Hidden Dragon Continent, Endless Sea Area. Suddenly, a huge whirlpool appeared. The whirlpool seemed to have transformed into a water dragon that soared into the sky. Soon, the aura of a spirit formation spread out from the center of the water dragon. With a bang, the water dragon exploded, and the teleportation array appeared. Above the formation, there was a figure lying on it with his buttocks in the air. His face was filled with despair. This person was Hades' Hera, who had sneaked out of the Hades Palace. At this moment, Hera's buttocks were in the air. His face was thin, and there were two big dark circles under his eyes. The flesh on his face had shrunk to his cheeks. With a flip of his body, the Nether King sat up in the teleportation array. He scratched his head and gently exhaled. He still looked quite dispirited. "Spicy strips. I want to eat spicy strips," Hades mumbled, his eyes blurred. In the next moment, he stood up and strode out of the formation. As soon as he stepped out of the array, the Nether King's body fell from the dozens of meters high array towards the surface of the sea. Swoosh! A strong gust of wind blew, causing the Nether King's hair to flutter continuously. "Without spicy strips, I can't even walk," Nether King Ha sighed as he fell. Roar! A beast roared. Beneath the Nether King, a shadow suddenly surged out from the sea. A moment later, a formidable sea spirit beast jumped out of the sea. It opened its massive mouth, revealing layers of sharp fangs. It was waiting for Hades to fall into its mouth. Its eyes were filled with anticipation. Hades's dark circles were really heavy. He opened his eyes, raised his hand, and patted. A while later, Hades yawned, sitting cross-legged on the back of the sea spirit beast with a swollen face. The sea behind the beast was surging rapidly. My dear delicious chili strip, your handsome Lord Nether King is here. The Nether King smacked his lips as he looked at the boundless sea. A look of excitement appeared on his face. Crossing the sea to meet spicy strips. Except for Hades, no one else could. Hidden Dragon Royal Court, Valley of Gluttony. Inside the Gluttony Square, 2 exquisite cooking stoves were placed neatly, and beside each stove were the ingredients that the 2 of them needed to use. Wenrencho's ingredient was a sea spirit beast fish as big as a buffalo. Both of them had the same grade, so it was a test of their cooking skills. Bufang's ingredient was a normal-sized fish. However, don't look like an ordinary fish. This fish was a tyrant in the sea. Because it was a lightning fish in the sea. When it swam, its body would emit lightning. The lightning was so powerful that it could electrocute ordinary spirit beasts. And this time, Bufang's ingredient was this difficult one. The Valley of Gluttony was the holy land of chefs in the Hidden Dragon continent. Although it was located in the center of the continent, at the edge of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court, the valley was self-sufficient. Moreover, they would purchase many ingredients from the sea. These sea spirit beasts were bought fresh from those channels. After checking out the ingredients, people began to watch the chef's challenge. Many people weren't unfamiliar with Wenrencho. He was Chu Chongqing's disciple. When he lost the chef's challenge to an outsider chef, he was really conflicted. However, today, he appeared in the chef's challenge once again. Moreover, some people knew that it was a chef's challenge between 2 enemies. It was Bufang who defeated Wenrencho in the chef's challenge. Today, Wenrencho challenged Bufang again to wash away the humiliation he had suffered. What an inspiring story! Many people looked at Wenrencho, who was preparing the giant spirit beast fish, and felt inexplicably excited. At the side of the arena there were 5 seats. Chu Chongqing and the 6th elder were sitting on them, while the other 3 seats were occupied by the top 3 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Yen Yu, Mu Qing, and Lu Jelly were special grade chefs, so they were qualified to sit on the high seat. They looked at Bufang with ridicule. They didn't have a good impression of this arrogant kid who wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. However, it wasn't bad to let them be the judges. Besides them, the others had come to the arena to watch the competition between Bufang and Wenrencho. After the painful experience in the Road of Gluttony, Wenrencho's personality had changed greatly. However, no doubt, his cooking skills had improved tremendously. He single-handedly grabbed the giant spirit beast fish, which was as big as a buffalo. Suddenly, he pulled, and the muscles on his arm bulged. With a loud bang, the giant spirit beast fish was ruthlessly smashed on the chopping board by Bufang. Water splashed from the spirit beast fish's mouth. Wenrencho squinted, and his aura became extremely dangerous in that instant. Swish, 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 swish. It seemed like Baiguang was blooming in his hand. The slender serpent beheading knife was like a nimble snake in his hand. Wenrencho was good at cooking fish, and this had never changed. Even though he had experienced so many things in the Road of Gluttony, he still hadn't changed. He gently pinched the body of the huge spirit beast with one hand. All of a sudden, Wenrencho's eyes shrank, and the corners of his mouth cracked. The kitchen knife danced in the air and instantly pierced into the flesh of the spirit beast fish. That spirit beast fish struggled, its tail flapping rapidly. Swish! That brutal way of handling the fish made the audience outside the arena grimace. Too bloody, too violent. He didn't care about the integrity of the ingredients. Wenrencho's method seemed to be to kill the fish. With a thud, the giant fish head fell to the ground. As the knife light moved, a whole piece of fish bone was gouged out from the flesh. Fresh blood dripped down, soaking the ground. He smashed all the fish bones and crushed them into powder with a heavy boulder. That violent scene frightened the audience. Bufang was calm, elegantly handling the fish in his hand. His vermilion robe fluttered, giving people a scholarly and calm feeling. His calmness was a sharp contrast to Wenrencho's brutality. The kitchen knife, which was covered in fresh blood, flew out of Wenrencho's hand. Wenrencho grabbed it and started to cut up the minced meat. Piece by piece, the fish was cut. His movements were so rough. However, some people's eyes shrank when they saw Wenrencho's movements, because they realized that every time Wenrencho cut, the angle of the cut was the same, and the thickness of the fish was exactly the same. The length of the fish was also very precise. This knife skill made Ouyang Chunfeng and the others suck in a breath of cold air. So strong. That was their first thought. Wenrencho, who had walked out of the road of gluttony, was no longer the second-grade chef Wenrencho. Whether it was his knife skill or his aura, they were all extraordinary. The kitchen knife was stabbed into the chopping board. Wenrencho grabbed the fish and started to shake it. Scarlet blood splashed. Then, he threw the fish into the clear water to rinse it. On the other side, the huge pot of oil had been set up. Wenrencho tore off his chef robe, revealing his upper body that was full of knife scars. As the oil boiled, he dipped the washed fish into the fishbone powder and threw it into the pot. The hot oil splashed. Wenrencho's violent and aesthetic cooking made many people's hearts jump. Sizzle! 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 In the pot of oil, the fish was boiling and curling. A strange fragrance slowly spread out from the pot of oil, lingering around the entire place. That was the smell of fish bones. Many people frowned. In the next moment, many people widened their eyes. A huge ladle sank into the pot of oil, scooping out the fish. Wenrencho grinned and started another pot. Sizzle! 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 Adding oil, chili, and spirit herbs, he started to stir-fry. A smell that made people's nostrils numbed spread out. Many people couldn't help but sneeze. Wenrencho stared at Bufang, sticking out his tongue and licking his lips. In the next moment, he knocked on the ladle. The oil had almost flowed out. Then, he poured the deep-fried fish into the pot. Boom! 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 As the wok was flipped, flames shot up to the sky. Mental energy filled the air. The flames seemed to sweep up, turning into a fierce beast that opened its mouth and roared. Boom! He covered the pot. After the flames disappeared, the aroma assailed his nostrils. Wenrencho swung his spatula, sending it flying. In the next moment, the golden yellow fish in the pot scattered in the sky. With a pull of his hand, the large round plate that he had prepared was pushed open, and the fish meat fell onto the round plate one after another. The fish meat was still jumping around, and the oil on it was still sizzling non-stop. Waves of heat rolled. The kitchen knife curled, waving on the round plate. In a short while, Wenrencho took a step back. The kitchen knife spun, then he put it away. His dish was done. The violent and aesthetic cooking was dazzling. Wenrencho raised his head and grinned, glaring at Bufang with a tyrannical gaze. Bufang expressionlessly took out a piece of white cloth and wiped the edges of the steaming hot dishes that had already been cooked. Then, he raised his head, exhaling. Wenrencho looked at Bufang's dish, the smile on his face getting wider. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lip. This time, you will lose. Bufang was stunned. He took off the velvet rope that tied his hair, shaking his head. He said calmly, "Don't talk nonsense. I'm in a hurry." Chapter 726. The violent aesthetic of cooking gave people a sense of spiritual and visual shock. Compared to the slow and unhurried cooking methods of ordinary chefs, Wenrencho's knife was right on the meat. It was as if he was going to stab his opponent to death. This made many people feel that it was novel and surprising. This was the cooking method that Wenrencho had learned in the road of gluttony. It was the cooking method that he had learned after going through so many trials and tribulations. This cooking method had allowed him to kill his way out of the road of gluttony. Today, he wanted to use this method to wash away his humiliation. This was the dish that he had poured his heart and soul into cooking, the exploding fish fruit. Wenrencho was very confident in this dish. With the famous snake cutter in his hand and his experience in the road of gluttony, the deliciousness of this dish would be beyond ordinary people's imagination. This was the strongest dish that he had ever cooked. The thick aroma of the fried fish spread to the entire square. The audience in the Gluttony Gods building was mesmerized by the aroma. It was very fragrant and mellow, with the fragrance of the sea spirit beast's fish. It was as if a vast ocean was washing their faces, intoxicating them. When Rinchot grinned as he looked at Bufang, he was very confident that he could defeat Bufang. He would use his strength to take back the knife that he had lost in the chef's challenge. This was the only way for him to wash away his humiliation and the obsession in his heart. However, Bufang was still so calm. He didn't care about Wen Rinchot's provocative eyes. It was as if Wen Rinchot was just a clown in front of him. He couldn't attract his attention at all. Bufang wore a striped red and white vermilion robe. He held the plate with one hand and slowly walked to the judge's table. The corner of Wen Rinchot's mouth twitched, and his eyes became solemn. He held the giant plate with one hand, and the aroma instantly shook. The pieces of fish in the plate, which looked like they were made of gold, trembled slightly, releasing a different kind of aroma and temptation. The fish was densely packed from the inside out, like a quietly blooming flower. It was too beautiful to behold. In the center, Wen Rinchot used fish bones to build a crystal-like tree branch. The tree branch opened up ferociously, bringing with it a wild and bloody beauty. The projection array above the Gluttony Gods building reflected the dish in Wen Rinchot's hand. The beautiful appearance of the dish made everyone exclaim in admiration. Even the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony had a stern look on their faces. Wen Rinchot's current standard had indeed reached the standard of a first-grade chef. Moreover, it was not low among first-grade chefs. Just based on this dish, Wen Rinchot had the qualifications to challenge any one of them. Moreover, there was a high chance that he could defeat them. This dish was very skillful and perfect, be it in terms of plate presentation or the heat control of the fish. On the other hand, the dishes served by Bufang. When everyone saw the image projected by the projection array, they were silent for a long time. Then, they burst into laughter that shook the heavens. That's right, it was a sneer of extreme disdain. Some people knew Bufang, and some didn't know Bufang. Some people knew that Bufang had real skills, but some just thought that Bufang was just showing off. Compared to Wen Rinchot's dish, Bufang's dish was simply a mess. The steamed fish was placed on a plate with a delicious, fat fish. The soup didn't have any fishy smell, and the fish meat was decorated with colorful, fragrant spirit herbs. It wasn't complicated, but it didn't surprise people. Was he the chef who said he wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony? Just an ordinary steamed fish? This kid. Did his head get caught in the door? He dared to take out such a dish to make a fool of himself. Compared to the others' sneers, the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony also commented on Bufang's dish, frowning. Of course, they wouldn't judge it one-sidedly like the diners. Anyway, it was Bufang's dish. How could it be ordinary? They knew Bufang's cooking skills. If he dared to challenge them, of course, he wouldn't be weak. This is my dish, the exploding fish fruit. Please taste it, said Wen Rinchot with a grin. He placed the plate on a big table in front of the judges. The judges stood up. Chu Chongqing, wearing a cloak, stood in front of the exploding fish fruit, his face stern. First of all, from the plate presentation, it was one level better than Bufang's steamed fish. However, he wasn't sure about the taste of the dish. Chu Chongqing picked up his chopsticks, picking up a piece of fish. It was so tender that it looked like tofu that would break if he used too much force. It was really strange. As soon as the fish entered his mouth, it cracked and thick gravy gushed out. It was like a hot current splashing out, hitting the walls of Chu Chongqing's mouth and attacking his taste buds. What? Chu Chongqing was bewildered, as if a bolt of lightning had just flashed in front of his eyes. Why was the fish so tender? Unbelievable. The others also picked up the fish and put it in their mouth. The moment the fish exploded in their mouths, their hearts shrank in fright. Delicious! The sixth elder exclaimed. Yen Yu's eyes narrowed, nodding to show his approval. Lu Jelly didn't smile, but he also nodded with a serious face. Mu Qing smiled sweetly, sticking out her tongue and licking her red lips. Her eyes showed that she was enjoying it. It was really delicious, worthy of being the guy who could walk out of the road of gluttony and get a famous knife. This level was enough for him to be a first-grade chef. Moreover, he was at the top level. The audience had already seen the projector, and their stomachs were rumbling. The fish was still steaming, and because of the stir-frying, it was slightly shaking. That enticing smell and color made many people swallow their saliva. It was really a dish that could increase people's appetites just by looking at it. Chu Chongqing didn't comment, but his clothes were bulging. Oh my God! The great elder's clothes are bulging. This. Does he approve of it? It can make the great elder's clothes bulge. It's enough to show how delicious this dish is. I really want to try it. I really want to eat it. No one should stop me. The diners were chattering non-stop. A single dish had stirred up their moods. When Rincho was satisfied with their attitude, he wanted to walk out of the road of gluttony like this. When Rincho swore. His dishes couldn't be ordinary. He had to make people gasp in admiration. He glanced at Bufang, wanting to see the surprise on his face. However, he was wrong. Bufang's face was still emotionless. When Rincho felt a little pain in his balls. Bufang's calmness made Wen Rincho a little uneasy. His dish wasn't enough to move him? Owner Bu, don't you want to taste my dish? Wen Rincho looked at Bufang, his eyes aggressive. Bufang was skeptical, looking at Wen Rincho. Then, he saw the excitement in the latter's eyes. Bufang was surprised, arching his brows. He took out his chopsticks, putting a piece of fish in his mouth. His brows arched, then, he put his chopsticks down, keeping silent. His calm demeanor caused Wen Rincho to lose his cool. What did Bufang mean by this? Did he look down on his dish? It's my turn. Please taste it, said Bufang. He nodded at the steamed fish on the table. However, besides the judges and the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony, the others were still talking about the exploding fish fruit. Everyone's faces were filled with longing. They wanted to taste it so much that they seemed to have forgotten about Bufang's dish. To this neglect, Bufang didn't mind. The gazes of all the referees shifted from the exploding fish flower fruit to the steamed fish dish that conformed to the rules. A moment later, green smoke twirled around Bufang's hand, and the dragon bone kitchen knife emerged. Swish, swish, swish. The kitchen knife spun. Bufang calmly twirled it, holding the knife. Then, he swung it forward. The knife light seemed to slash through the dark night, tearing the dark curtain. The fish's belly was directly cut by Bufang. Swish, a clear and melodious sound rang out, like the sound of dripping spring water. The entire Glutton Gods building quieted down at this moment. Yen Yu and the others gazed at Bufang's steamed fish, gawking. Beams of light shot out from the fish's belly. The golden light shone on Wen Rincho's face, showing his frightened face clearly. The fish's abdomen split open, and thick glowing gravy flowed out of the fish's abdomen. Grains that looked like gems flowed out of the fish's abdomen, and beams of light that looked like lightning flashed in those grains. It was like a dreamlike scene, bringing a violent visual impact. Everyone's hair stood on end at this moment. After twirling the knife, the dragon bone kitchen knife turned into green smoke, dispersing. Bufang swayed his vermilion robe, saying faintly, "Thunderstorm steamed fish. Please enjoy." Chapter 727. In just a blink of an eye, the entire Gluttony Square quieted down. The beams of light shooting up into the sky were like beams of light shooting deep into people's eyes. Beautiful, cool, too beautiful to behold. It was a dish that could emit light. Everybody took in a breath of cold air. The thick soup flowing from the fish's belly and the gem-like ingredients made them gawk and drop their jaws in awe. The thunderstorm steamed fish did give people a feeling of astonishment like a thunderstorm. Everybody in the Gluttony Square lifted their heads to look at the projection in the sky. Under the projection, the dish was sparkling. The soup flowing from the fish's belly emitted a mesmerizing halo, which was so beautiful that people had to hold their breath. The gem-like ingredients resonated with each other. Lightning bolts flashed and moved back and forth. The steamed fish was as quiet as a virgin. However, as soon as the soup in the fish's belly flowed out, it started to move like a cunning rabbit. It gave people a strange feeling. That kind of feeling made everyone involuntarily suck in a deep breath. A thick aroma diffused from the fish. Steam billowed, and the soup seemed to be boiling. Chu Chongsheng and the others focused their eyes. They couldn't believe it. "What's that?" Chu Chongsheng furrowed his brows as if he was curious. He took a white porcelain spoon and gently scooped a spoonful of the thick soup. The soup was mixed with some sparkling pieces of lightning. The soup was boiling, and the aroma diffused. Sizzle! 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 There seemed to be electric arcs moving between the pieces. Chu Chongsheng curiously looked at the electric cube. That cube was sparkling and translucent like a dazzling jade, which piqued his curiosity. At this moment, he couldn't recognize what kind of ingredient it was. Chu Chongsheng poured the soup into his mouth. The moment it entered his mouth, the hot taste and the aroma flowed into his mouth. Chu Chongsheng's eyes froze and his face changed. His white beard and hair were standing on end, and his entire body seemed to be shivering. Gulp! His throat moved as he swallowed the dish in his mouth. Chu Chongsheng couldn't help but exhale a mouthful of warm air as the delicious taste rolled down his throat and into his stomach. The warm feeling made him feel so comfortable. So comfortable. Chu Chongsheng's eyes were complicated and surprised. He looked at Bufang, his eyes filled with disbelief. There was a tearing noise. Without any warning, Chu Chongsheng's clothes exploded. His muscles, which were as dense as a horned dragon, were revealed. "I didn't expect that. These small cubes are actually fish meat. I actually didn't recognize them at first glance." Chu Chongsheng took a pair of chopsticks, picked up the steamed fish, and flicked it sideways. Immediately, the fish skin, which was as thin as paper, was peeled off. This seemingly ordinary steamed fish was actually just a layer of fish skin. The fish meat was dug out by Bufang and chopped into pieces. This knife skill, absolutely stunning. After digging out the fish meat, he did not damage the fish skin at all. He used the fish skin to pass off as genuine. The fish meat inside was already covered in thick gravy. That soup was not ordinary. It was clearly made by mixing many elixirs with cubes of fish. It looked crystal clear, but in reality, it melted the moment it entered one's mouth. It fully released the texture of the fish and the numbing feeling of the lightning that the fish itself possessed. It was really a dish from the heavenly palace. From ordinary to stunning, Bufang had used only 1 second. Chu Chongsheng's action attracted many people's attention. Instantly, the sound of people taking in a breath of cold air arose. Was this King knife skill? He had dug out the fish meat, but the fish skin was not damaged at all. Moreover, he could put the cooked ingredients back into the fish's body and steam it. This kind of knife skill had blinded everyone's eyes. No, they didn't see the process of his knife skill, but the result had frightened them. Yan Yu and the others' eyes shrank. Obviously, they were frightened. Leaving behind the undamaged fish skin and removing all the fish meat. How did he do that? How fast was his knife skill? Yan Yu asked himself. It was basically impossible for his knife skills to reach such a level. Perhaps only Lu Jieli's meticulous knife skills could compare to his. They didn't expect that Bufang's move would make their skin tighten. A sense of urgency hit them, making them take in a breath of cold air. No wonder why he dared to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. With just this knife skill, they had to pay attention to him. If Wenrencho's knife skill was a violent aesthetic, Bufang's knife skill was so exquisite that it was like a supernatural work of the gods. Comparing the two, Wenrencho's knife skills paled in comparison. He was completely outclassed. Swish, the porcelain spoon scooped up the gravy, which was mixed with the fish meat. The thickened gravy pulled a long line, thick and translucent. The aroma diffused, steaming hot. Yen Yu's face became serious. When the gravy entered his mouth, the fish meat melted. There seemed to be light blue lightning flashing on his face. His hair stood up, and the pores on his body shrank. A wave of heat flowed from his throat to his stomach. He couldn't help but exhale a long breath of hot air. It was as though he had spat out all of his depression. This dish. Delicious. Yen Yu's eyes were complicated. He licked the porcelain spoon, looking at Bufang. His mind was filled with thoughts, twists and turns. He had to admit that he had underestimated this little chef. The others also picked up their spoons, scooping the gravy. Mu Cheng was the most curious. Perhaps it was because she was a woman, so her mind was meticulous. Her knife skill was also exquisite. Hence, she was very curious about this dish. No matter how hard she racked her brain, she couldn't understand how Bufang could scoop out the fish meat without damaging its skin. He could even put the fish meat back and steam it. It was as though the fish had never been processed before. Filled with curiosity, she parted her red lips, pouring the thick gravy into her mouth. Ah! The instant of numbness caused Mu Cheng's entire body to spasm. A flush instantly surfaced on her skin. The boiling hot soup and the aroma of the fish spread out in her mouth. The numbness that existed in the fish's attribute caused Mu Cheng's legs to involuntarily clamp together. Her hair fluttered and her face was red. Her eyes were blurry, and she felt as though she had been stripped naked, tossing and turning in the sea. Fishes with lightning all over their bodies swam around her, bringing waves of numbness to her body. There was only one word that could describe Mu Cheng's current state of mind. That was awesome. The moaning sounds gradually became softer. Under the strange gazes of the surrounding people, Mu Cheng's beautiful eyes were like limpid autumn waters. A blush crept up her face. She was actually a little shy. It was really a dish that could make people go crazy. With a complicated gaze, she looked at Bufang, who was wearing a striped red and white chef robe. His hand was wrapped in black and white bandages. The latter's face was calm, making her sigh. He didn't come with good intentions. The surrounding diners looked at the projection, continuously swallowing their saliva. After the judges had tasted the dish, they all had different expressions. It made their hearts itch. This dish. Was it really that magical? The knife skill was really amazing, but was the taste really that good? Many people came back to their senses, and in the next instant, a clamor broke out. Oh my God! Goddess Mu Cheng's posture. I've fallen. Clothes explode. The great elder's clothes exploded. Did you guys see? The legendary clothes explode. It's really breathtaking. It's really uncanny. This knife skill is so King terrifying. In an instant, the clamor broke out, causing the entire Gluttony Square to boil. Regarding this, Bufang was really calm. To him, everything was normal. Victory and defeat had been decided. Wenrencho's improvement was obvious. After crossing the road of gluttony, he had grown a lot and become stronger. His cooking skills were exquisite, and he had even formed his own style. This was the most basic requirement of a first-grade chef. However, while he was growing, so was Bufang. In this chef's challenge, he was going to be defeated. Chu Chongqing also thought about this, and he couldn't help but sigh when Rincho had encountered Bufang. It was really frustrating. When Rincho was already in a daze. In the next moment, his eyes moved and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He lost again? Why? What happened after all? He had strenuously crossed the road of gluttony. Why did he lose again? He had become a first-grade chef, but why did he lose again? His eyes revealed a crazed look. Scanning the entire place, he found that the people around him were all looking at him with sympathy. F***ck sympathy. I don't need sympathy. When Rincho roared inwardly. These people didn't know what he had experienced in the road of gluttony. I don't believe it. When Rencho's face twisted as he roared crazily at Chu Chongqing and the others. Calm down. You have to learn to get used to it, Bu Fang said indifferently. A moment later, he raised his bandaged arm, pointing at the thunderstorm steamed fish. You can try it. When Rincho's eyes focused. Sweeping his gaze, he strode to the table. With a swish, he grabbed the porcelain spoon, scooped up a spoonful of soup, and poured it into his mouth. As soon as the soup entered his mouth, his movements froze. His entire body froze on the spot, not moving an inch. His face froze. The audience held their breath. When Rencho's emotional outburst was beyond their expectations. Those who knew the inside story couldn't help but look at him with sympathy. The result was obvious. When Rincho lost, the frozen When Rencho's hand, which was holding the porcelain spoon, shook violently. Eventually, he couldn't hold the spoon anymore, and it fell to the ground, breaking into pieces. When Rincho lifted his head, his eyes gradually became moist, and tears streamed down his cheeks. The moment the soup entered his mouth, he knew he had lost. At this moment, there was a line in his heart that he didn't know if he should say it or not. This owner Bu was sent by God to torture him. Since he was born, why would one Rincho? He still had a sad feeling in his heart. The kitchen knife that he had just gotten was going to be taken away again. He was so angry. Chu Chongqing indifferently looked at one Rincho, then sighed. Now, let's decide the final winner. Everyone has one vote. Let's vote now. There was no suspense about the result. When Rincho came arrogantly, but Bu Fang mercilessly subdued him. The audience was speechless. The top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony also felt the pressure. The latter didn't come with good intentions. Buzz in the sky, a giant phantom of a beast emerged. It was the Taotia's oath. Compared to the white Taotai and the black Taotai, this phantom was much more intimidating. Perhaps it was the phantom of a purebred Taotai, the ancient beast's oath. When Rincho failed in the chef's challenge, his kitchen knife will be taken away. The rules of the chef's challenge have been changed. When Rincho will retain his right to cook. After 1 month, he will be eligible to challenge Bu Fang again. The Taotia's phantom was so majestic. Its voice boomed in Wen Rencho's ears, who had lost his soul. A moment later, when Rencho's eyeballs moved, everybody was bewildered. What the heck? The rules of the chef's challenge didn't seem right. Chapter 728. The change of the Taotia's oath made everybody bewildered. Was it still the Taotia's oath that they were familiar with? The original Taotia's oath stated that if the chef failed the chef's challenge, he would be deprived of his kitchen knife and his right to cook forever, unless the higher-ups of the Valley of Gluttony were willing to help him break the oath. But now the oath was much more merciful. Although the chef would still be deprived of his kitchen knife, he wouldn't be deprived of his right to cook. If he lost his kitchen knife, he could always take it back. However, if he lost his right to cook, it would be the cruelest torture to a chef. Chu Chongqing frowned. Chu Chongqing furrowed his brows. The oath had changed. What was going on? What Bu Fang had said in the restaurant was still lingering in his ears. He didn't think it was a big deal. He didn't expect that the oath would change this time. Was that kid the Taotia's illegitimate child? Let alone the fact that he had taken the black and white Taotia's souls, the Taotia's oath's rules had changed. That little chef was shrouded in mystery. Buzz, the sound of the oath faded away. A moment later, a magic array emerged under Bu Fang's feet. Light sparkled, making Bu Fang's face look even fairer. A crystal knife cabinet emerged from the magic array. Bufang's hand leaned on the crystal cabinet. The cold feeling from the cabinet made Bufang slightly raise his head. He opened the cabinet, revealing several kitchen knives. They were his trophies from the previous chef's challenge. The appearance of the knife cabinet made people's eyes shrink. This fellow had even prepared a knife cabinet. Did he really want to flatten the Valley of Gluttony? Many people took a deep breath, and the way they looked at Bufang gradually became a little sharper. No matter what, they were all members of the Valley of Gluttony. What Bufang had done was a provocation to the Valley of Gluttony. Bufang was just a chef from outside the Valley of Gluttony. He dared to provoke the Valley of Gluttony. They must teach him a lesson. When Rincho was in a daze. Knife cabinet, it was this knife cabinet again. He lifted his gaze and looked straight at it. He saw the soul-freezing kitchen knife resting quietly in the cabinet. It was originally his kitchen knife, but now it had become Bufang's spoils of war. He felt a little sullen because the kitchen knife in his hand that he had just obtained was going to become Bufang's spoils of war, lying in the knife cabinet. To him, this was a great blow. Of course, there was also a piece of good news. The Taotia's oath had changed, which gave him the chance to challenge Bufang in a chef's challenge 1 month later. He could win back the famous knife that belonged to him. Taking a deep breath, when Rincho suddenly felt that his chest was brimming with fighting spirit, Buzz, the famous blade, snake cutter, appeared. In the next moment, it turned into a beam of light and dashed toward Bufang. Bufang raised his bandaged arm and held the so-called famous saber. As soon as he held the kitchen knife, Bufang's mind moved. It was indeed a famous knife. There was a hidden spirit within it. It indeed lived up to the name of a famous knife. To be able to collect a famous knife seemed to be a good choice. Bufang opened the knife cabinet, and an ice-cold aura spread out from within. In the next moment, he placed the famed knife into the cabinet and placed it on the shelf. The crystal knife cabinet shone down, and the famous knife, snake cutter, reflected the light. It was too beautiful to behold. When Rencho's heart twitched, and his heart ached so much that he couldn't breathe. Looking at the 2 kitchen knives, he almost lost all hope. However, for the sake of retrieving the famed knives, he kept a close eye on Bufang. 1 month later, I will definitely challenge you again. At that time, I will definitely win back the famous knife that belongs to me with my own hands. Bufang patted the knife cabinet, and the knife cabinet instantly disappeared into the magic array. Bufang lowered his arms and looked at him indifferently. I won't lose and I can't lose. I hope that you won't despair. Don't despair, arrogant. When Bufang said those words, everybody felt their chests tighten. He didn't put the chefs of the Valley of Gluttony in his eyes at all. He arrogantly said that he wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony, but he also said that he wouldn't lose. Didn't that mean that he would definitely win? This kind of arrogance made Yin Yu narrow his eyes. He didn't like arrogant people. To deal with arrogance, the best way was to give him a thorough blow. All right, the first chef's challenge is over. Next, it's your turn. Who will accept the next chef's challenge? Don't worry. Everyone will have a share. It will be the same sooner or later. Bufang's vermilion robe slowly fluttered in the wind. His eyes scanned the people around the arena, as well as Yen Yu's group. Hiss. The onlookers took in a breath of cold air. He really dared to say such words. Chef Yen Yu, thoroughly suppress this arrogant brat. Does he think that he is invincible just because he can cook well? He dares to look down on the chefs of our Valley of Gluttony. Noodle King Ouyang, use your kitchen knife to teach him a lesson. Motherf *Ker. The dignity of the Valley of Gluttony will be protected by you guys. Beautiful goddess Mu Qing, make this little chef kneel under your skirt. The onlookers were leaning on the windows of the Gluttony Gods building, shouting and shouting at the top of their lungs. Their eyes were bloodshot. They were provoked by Bufang. The clamor of the crowd turned into a huge sound wave that rolled over. Ordinary people, under such pressure and clamor, would have felt their legs go soft, and they wouldn't be able to stand steadily. However, Bufang was still calm. He lifted his head, glancing at the crowd around the Gluttony Gods building. The corners of his mouth twitched. It was this smile that was clearly captured by quite a number of people. Immediately, the crowd became even more enraged. The clamor was deafening, rolling like waves. Mu Cheng and the others didn't know whether to cry or laugh. What was going on? Anyway, their anger was reasonable. This kid was too arrogant. Together with his calm face that deserved a beating, people hated that they couldn't beat him up. Lu Jelly's face was still calm, and his meticulous face was a little bit solemn. The others, on the other hand, looked at him and exhaled softly. The roars of tens of thousands of people caused their blood to surge and their eyes to shine brightly. Of course, part of the reason was that the rules of the chef's challenge had changed, which made them less scrupulous. Although the consequence of losing the chef's challenge was still cruel, it was much better than being deprived of the right to cook forever. After all, the current rules of the chef's challenge gave them hope to take back their kitchen knives. Yen Yu was considering if he should be the first one to make a move. However, he thought that as the #1 chef on the tablet of gluttony, it would be a loss of face if he made a move so soon. Just as he was hesitating, a figure suddenly walked out from the crowd. That figure was a little fat, holding a piece of raw meat in his hand. He wore a warm smile on his face. He slowly walked to Bufang, parting his mouth to reveal his white teeth. Under the sunlight, his teeth sparkled. However, inside that light, he could see some pieces of raw meat swish. The fat man shoved a piece of raw meat into his mouth, then tore it into pieces. His mouth chewed unceasingly, and the sound of chewing echoed unceasingly. It's really annoying to waste time. You little chef, let this chef compete with you. Seeing your level, this great chef can't help but feel itchy. The chubby man said vaguely as he chewed. What? Bufang was a little surprised. He could feel the pressure from this fellow, which made him feel pressured. Bufang exhaled, his eyes solemn as he looked at the fat man. Who are you? What's your rank on the tablet of gluttony? Me? I'm Harry. I like to eat meat the most. People call me Meat Demon. My level is a little low, ranked 5th on the tablet of gluttony. Meat Demon Harry tore another piece of raw meat and put it in his mouth. The chewing noises made people shudder. He looked at Bufang with a gentle gaze as if he was sizing up his prey. Ranked 5th on the tablet of gluttony? Bufang arched his brows. This fat man ranked 5th on the tablet of gluttony. No wonder why he gave him a heavy pressure. When Ouyang Chunfeng and the rest saw Harry step forward, they all smiled bitterly. This fellow couldn't wait any longer. Don't be fooled by Meat Demon Harry's charmingly naive appearance. He was a chef's challenge enthusiast. Yeah, he was a chef's challenge enthusiast. Before he became famous, he often challenged others to a chef's challenge. Also, he liked to collect the kitchen knives of the losers. He also had a knife cabinet, but it was much larger than Bufang's. There were at least several hundred kitchen knives piled up inside. What did hundreds of knives mean? It meant that Meat Demon Harry had smashed hundreds of chefs' dreams of being chefs. It even included a chef from the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony. He was truly a ruthless man. As soon as Meat Demon Harry stepped out, the cheering and cheering quieted down. Everybody looked at Meat Demon Harry with fear. Meat Demon Harry could be said to be the chef with the worst reputation among the top 10 chefs of the tablet of gluttony. Of course, no matter what, Harry was a member of the Valley of Gluttony. Thus, many people were still cheering for him. Following the sound of a person's encouragement, in the next moment, the crowd surged forth like a tidal wave, cheering for Harry. Harry was a little surprised, biting a piece of raw meat. He smacked his lips and said, I didn't expect that I, Meat Demon Harry, would be so popular one day. It's all thanks to you. Then, I won't be merciful to you, don't worry. I'll finish this quickly. I won't let you suffer for a long time. Anyway, my hobby is to see the painful faces of arrogant chefs like you when their knives are taken away. Harry grinned, sticking his tongue out to lick his lips. He gazed at Bufang as if he was looking at his prey. Bufang was bewildered under Harry's gaze, but his face remained emotionless. A moment later, he raised his bandaged hand, talking casually. Good. You're up. Comparing meat. Who was Bufang afraid of? Chapter 729. Bufang pointed at Meat Demon Harry and said his name in an indifferent tone. At this moment, everyone took a deep breath. An arrogant little chef was going to face Meat Demon Harry, a chef's challenge enthusiast. What kind of collision would it be? Everyone was very curious and interested. Chu Chongqing slowly walked over. His senile face and muscular body gave people a strange feeling. He looked at Bufang and Meat Demon Harry. Harry wore a warm smile, which made him look harmless. He was holding a piece of raw meat in his hand, trying to bite it. The next chef's challenge will be held tomorrow. The theme of the chef's challenge is meat. Chu Chongqing indifferently looked at Bufang and Meat Demon Harry, speaking with a serious tone. Will it be carried out tomorrow? He gave them one night to prepare? Bufang narrowed his eyes, giving Chu Chongqing a deep look. That old man was a little scheming. Anyway, it was a chance for Bufang to rest, although he didn't really need it. Of course, Meat Demon Harry didn't object. The rules of the chef's challenge were like that. Sometimes, after a chef's challenge was set, the challenge would start 1 year later. No matter what, the chef's challenge was something that could affect one's whole life. Once the chef failed, he would be deprived of his kitchen knife, and he would lose his right to cook. Although the rules had changed, who knew if the rules were wrong? Thus, no chef dared to use their future as a wager. Of course, having one night to prepare for the chef's challenge was the best choice. Even Meat Demon Harry, a fan of chef's challenges, was the same. He was a fan of chef's challenges, but he still needed to prepare. Otherwise, if he was careless and failed miserably, he would be finished. All right, Sixth Elder, take Bufang to his place. Tomorrow we'll continue the chef's challenge here, Chu Chongqing said seriously. The Sixth Elder's mustache arched. The Sixth Elder's mustache curled up as he raised his eyebrows. He gave Bufang a deep look and nodded. Bufang didn't say anything. He turned around and walked out of the arena. The first chef's challenge ended in front of the gawking audience. More and more people were looking forward to the second chef's challenge. Meat Demon Harry was going to have a chef's challenge against the arrogant little chef, who wanted to challenge the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Everybody was looking forward to it. Today's chef's challenge had opened their eyes. A chef's challenge between two first-grade chefs wasn't something that could be seen on normal days. When they walked out of the Glutton Gods building, they were so excited that they couldn't calm down. That kind of excitement made their bodies tremble slightly. Night fell silently. In the middle of the hidden dragon continent, in the middle of the mountain range that was blooming with colorful light, a purple-robed figure was seated on an altar that was piled up with colorful spiritual stones. That person's entire body was shrouded with powerful energy ripples. As he inhaled and exhaled, there would be a white stream shuttling through his nostrils. From time to time, it would spurt out and rumble. Not far from that purple-robed figure was a graceful, beautiful woman. Her eyes gazed at Amethyst Elder, who was sitting on the altar. Her long eyelashes shivered from time to time. All of a sudden, that purple-robed figure opened his eyes. Light moved in his eyes, and a magic array quickly condensed above his head. That magic array spun, its radiance dazzling. Above the vault of heaven, the night was dark, and the sky was filled with twinkling stars. A star suddenly bloomed with extreme radiance, resonating with Amethyst Elder on the altar. A beam of starlight shot down from the vault of heaven, quickly hitting the magic array. Instantly, The entire mountain range seemed to be covered in starlight. After being purified by the magic array, a light blue starlight that looked like a small snake drilled out of the magic array, entering Amethyst Elder's glabella. The light on Amethyst Elder's body became much more dazzling, but in the end it disappeared. The light in the beautiful woman's eyes quickly disappeared. An indescribable sense of loss rose in her heart. Did I fail in the end? The pretty lady sighed as she turned around and disappeared from the vicinity of the altar. Amethyst Elder exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. His breakthrough had failed again. Why was it so difficult to break through? The divine spirit realm was worthy of being the hardest realm in the divine realm. Every small realm was much more difficult than the previous big realm. Amethyst Elder stood up, his eyes becoming sharp. I don't have much time. If I still can't break through with my power, I won't be able to suppress that beast. I have to hurry and break into the Valley of Gluttony. I have to get the inheritance left behind by the first Valley Master, as well as the cultivation manual. The first Valley Master of the Valley of Gluttony had a high cultivation base. After he disappeared, he had left behind an extremely important inheritance for the Valley of Gluttony. Many people were eyeing that inheritance. Within the hidden Dragon Royal Court, there were many holy lands that had their eyes on the Valley of Gluttony. Their goal was to get that inheritance. Buzz, Amethyst Elder stood up. His eyes shone with a bright light. From afar, a figure sped over and knelt in front of him. Lord Amethyst Elder, How's the matter with the Valley of Gluttony? Did you get the inheritance? Amethyst Elder clasped his hands and asked. That figure's body instantly trembled. Then, he said bitterly, I attacked the Valley of Gluttony, but I was forced to retreat by Chu Chongqing of the Valley of Gluttony. I didn't get the inheritance. Forced to retreat? Didn't you bring the golden armor guards? With Golden Saber helping you, no matter how strong Chu Chongqing is, he can't defeat the two of you, unless Chu Chongqing is already an almighty. Golden Saber didn't join hands with me. He went to find out about the netherworld creature. In the end, it seems like he died. The white-bearded old man's body trembled like a sieve. He was really in awe of the Amethyst Elder in front of him. This Amethyst Elder was the person with the highest authority in the Heavenly Spring Holy Land, other than the Saint Sovereign. He had the majority of the authority in the Heavenly Spring Holy Land. He was incomparably dignified and cold. However, at this moment, even Amethyst Elder's eyes couldn't help but shrink. Golden Saber's power was close to that of an almighty. How could he be killed? On the hidden dragon continent, there was a netherworld creature that could reach the peak of the great ethereal realm? Impossible. The hidden dragon continent had the suppression of the principles. It was impossible for a netherworld creature to appear at that level, unless Amethyst Elder's eyes flashed. Then, he shook his head. Impossible. Couldn't be like what he had imagined. Let's not talk about Golden Saber for now. Right now, the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance is the most important thing. Experts from everywhere are paying attention and preparing to take action. We can't fall behind. I'll give you the god-slaying equipment. Go to the Valley of Gluttony and bring back the inheritance. Redeem yourself with merit. Amethyst Elder said. Amethyst Elder said. Every time he said a sentence, the old man's body would tremble, and his eyes would reveal a look of fear. Terrified beyond words. This time, the other holy lands might also take action. They have been holding back for so long. In the end, they won't be able to hold it in anymore. Hence, this time, you will meet the experts from the other holy lands with the god-slaying equipment. However, you have to remember, don't retreat. Our goal is the inheritance, Amethyst Elder said. The old man nodded, lowering his head and retreating. Amethyst Elder's eyes twinkled. He raised his head to look at the sky. In the starry sky, there seemed to be a shooting star flying across. The next day, Bufang opened his eyes. he brought Xiao Bai and Xiao Ye out of the inn that the sixth elder had specially prepared for him. This inn had a kitchen, which allowed Bufang to practice cooking. Last night, the sixth elder had shamelessly asked him to return the heaven and earth obsidian flame that belonged to him. However, Bufang had mercilessly rejected him. Then, he pulled Bufang and said that if he didn't hand over the flame, he would have to stay in the Valley of Gluttony. Bufang was a little speechless. At that moment, he wanted to ask Xiao Bai to beat up the sixth elder. However, that fellow had left shortly after, which made Bufang a little gloomy. However, the gloominess from last night didn't affect Bufang's mood today. After he had practiced cooking for a while in the kitchen, he left the inn and headed to the Gluttony Square. The square was already a boiling cauldron of voices. The surroundings were crowded with people. Compared to yesterday, today's crowd was more lively and lively. They were all here to watch the chef's challenge. They had been waiting for this chef's challenge for a long time. Bufang walked to the Gluttony Square. The doors were open and light shone on Bufang's body, which looked really mysterious. In the Gluttony Square, besides Meat Demon Harry, the other top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony had gathered. They looked at Bufang with serious eyes. Whether Bufang could threaten them or not, they didn't know his performance yesterday. But today, if Bufang could defeat Meat Demon Harry, there was no doubt that this little chef, Bufang, would be a big threat to them. His chef's challenge wasn't just a joke. Every one of them should be nervous. In the center of the Gluttony Square were 2 exquisite arenas. In the middle of the arenas were 5 seats, just like the day before. Chu Chongqing sat quietly on his seat. Between his breaths, spirit energy gushed out. After he had broken through to the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder, his fighting competence could be compared to an almighty expert. His pressure was heavy. Thud thud thud. Bufang walked to his stove, his face emotionless. All of a sudden, he felt the entire arena shake. He was a little skeptical, so he turned around to see. At the entrance, a huge black shadow was pressing down on them. That shadow was so massive that it looked like a small mountain. The Gluttony Square's gate was really big, but that shadow had squeezed through the gate. Everybody took in a breath of cold air. Looking at the small figure under that massive shadow, it was Meat Demon Harry. Meat Demon Harry's fat jiggled as he carried the giant shadow on his shoulder, walking step by step into the Gluttony Square. It's a spirit beast at the divine soul realm. Oh my God! That spirit beast is so big. Its pressure is so strong. Does Meat Demon Harry want to use the meat of such a giant spirit beast to cook? The audience burst into an uproar, taking in a breath of cold air. Thud! The hill-sized figure was thrown to the ground by Meat Demon, causing the entire arena to shake. Sorry, I'm late. Let's start our chef's challenge now, Meat Demon Harry said with a smile. Meat Demon Harry said with a smile. He spun the kitchen knife in his hand and cut off a piece of bloody raw meat from the spirit beast, then chewed and chewed it. Bufang glanced at the giant spirit beast. It wasn't dead yet, and its aura hadn't dispersed yet. Its feeble breathing was still there. It was the meat that Meat Demon Harry had chosen, a spirit beast at the divine soul realm. Indeed, Meat Demon Harry was worthy of his reputation. That's the heaven-shaking deer, a spirit beast at the divine soul realm with a 3-step soul ladder. Although it's massive, its speed is really fast. Meat Demon Harry has caught it. It's really rare. To win, he's spent a lot. When Ren Shang leaned against the wall, pouring a mouthful of wine from his bamboo tube. I've prepared my ingredient. Where's yours? This time, you have to prepare your own ingredients. I hope you won't disappoint me. My kitchen knife can't wait any longer, said Meat Demon Harry. He had to prepare his own ingredient. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. He glanced at Meat Demon Harry's mountain-like spirit beast. Then, with a shake of his hand, an exquisite steak appeared in his hand. That steak was full of spirit energy, and it was quiet and noble. Many people were bewildered. They didn't know what that steak was. However, Chu Chongqing, who was sitting neatly in his seat, shrank his eyes. Looking at the steak, he took a deep breath of cold air. This little chef took out Taoya's meat? What's the point of competing? Chapter 730. The raging waves were surging, fiercely slamming into the surface of the sea. The salty sea breeze was blowing. On the surface of the boundless sea, a giant beast was swimming at high speed. Its tail flapped against the water, stirring up the white seawater. With a terrifying momentum, it sped forward, breaking through the seawater and flying to both sides. The giant beast widened its eyes and opened its mouth. It inhaled and exhaled continuously, as though it was panting heavily. Its speed was very fast. It was like an arrow, shooting across the surface of the sea. From time to time, fish-type spirit beasts leaped up from the surface of the sea. However, they were startled by the ferocious spirit beast. Their bodies shrank, and they fell back into the sea with a plop. Hades' arrow was wearing a black robe. He sat on the head of the spirit beast, swinging his legs. His hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were filled with excitement. Old whale, swim faster. This king can already smell the spicy gluten. Hades' arrow said. As he spoke, he squinted his eyes, widened his nostrils, and took a deep breath of the salty sea breeze. The giant spirit beast underneath rolled its eyes. If it wasn't for your powerful fighting prowess, I would have swallowed you in one bite. What the hell is a spicy strip? How would this fish know? Old whale, swim faster. You're tired now. When there are spicy strips later, I will take one out for you to taste. Did you know? Spicy strips are really delicious. It's a dish that can make people feel happy. It's like meeting your first love. That kind of feeling. Hades' arrow swung his legs, talking nonstop. The giant whale's eyes also kept rolling. He regretted his words now. Why did he want to swallow the fellow that fell from his mouth? Who knew that this fellow was so strong and talked so much? Even if he was beaten to death, he wouldn't choose to open his mouth. In the distance, on the sparkling surface of the sea, a long and narrow coastline suddenly appeared. The shoreline flickered with light under the beating of the waves. The old whale was so happy that it was about to cry. Its eyes were filled with tears. Finally, it had reached the shore. If it didn't reach the shore, it would have died of exhaustion. Instead, it would have been annoyed to death by this fellow. Was this guy's mouth a cannonball? Moo! A long roar. In the next moment, the giant whale finally reached the shore. With a swing of its tail, it smashed onto the shore, causing the embankment to tremble violently. Gravel fell from the sky. Hades' arrow's eyes lit up. With a leap, he jumped down from the whale's head and landed on the shore with a loud bang. Hades, who had landed on the shore, felt as if he had seen the sun again. He turned around and patted the body of the old whale. Old whale, do you want to go with me? I'll treat you to spicy strips. Eat your sister. The old whale rolled its eyes. It was not stupid to follow Urwo to the shore. With a loud moo, a column of water shot up from the top of the old whale's head and into the sky. Splash! It looked like it was raining, splashing all over the ground. Hades reached out his hand, feeling the warm water droplet. His eyes brightened. Indeed, old whale, you still love me. Are you saying yes to me? Hades flipped his black hair, looking at the old whale's giant eyes with a sincere face. His eyes were a little blurred. The old whale pondered for a while. A moment later, it swung its tail, hitting the shore. Then, it turned around and swam away. It looked as if it was in a panic. Hades looked at the back of the old whale, rubbing the corners of his eyes. He exhaled softly. What a cute old whale! I'll bring spicy strips to you, Hades said. After speaking, he turned around and strode towards the vast continent. Cloud Mist Restaurant, Lord Hades is back. Everybody looked at the steak in Bufang's hand. They were a little skeptical. If there was no comparison, there would be no harm. Meat Demon Harry was carrying such a huge spirit beast, while this arrogant little chef just took out a piece of steak. Who knew what grade of spirit beast meat his steak was? Of course, even if the others didn't know, it didn't mean that Chu Chongqing didn't know. The latter's serious face was a little dark, as if he was constipated. He wanted to win because he needed Xiao Ye to open the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. He wanted the Valley of Gluttony to continue its glory. He didn't want to lose, but that kid Bufang had taken out a piece of Taotai meat. Did they even need to compete? The two of them weren't on the same level. No matter how good Meat Demon Harry was at cooking meat dishes, the gap between them was enough to make him desperate. This chef's challenge didn't have any suspense. It was different from the others' optimism and anticipation. He had guessed the ending right from the beginning, however. No matter how sorrowful he was, he had to act as if nothing had happened. He stood up, glancing at Bufang and then at Meat Demon Harry. Now, the chef's challenge officially begins. As soon as Chu Chongqing's voice faded, Meat Demon Harry moved. He laughed out loud, causing the fat on his body to jiggle. His hand shook and he pulled out a kitchen knife that looked like a butcher's knife. Of course, his kitchen knife was somewhat different from a butcher's knife. The tip of the knife had a dagger, which was extremely sharp and sparkling with cold light. It's Meat Demon Harry's big chopper. It's not a famous knife, but Meat Demon Harry has used this knife to defeat many chefs. It's not a famous knife, but it's better than a famous knife. It's this butcher's knife. When the audience saw the big chopper in Meat Demon Harry's hand, they couldn't stop talking. Meat Demon Harry wore a strange, excited smile on his face. He patted his belly, grabbed the big chopper, and dashed toward the giant spirit beast. I'm an expert at eating meat. I know very well which part of a spirit beast's meat is the most delicious, which part of its meat is the most tender, and which part of its meat is the chewiest. Boom! Meat Demon Harry laughed while running. All of a sudden, he dragged his big chopper, stomping on the ground. The ground shook, and his fat body floated up like an immortal. He landed on the giant spirit beast. He brandished his machete, and with a poochie sound, it easily pierced through the fur of the spirit beast, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Mwahaha! Meat Demon Harry laughed, dragging his big chopper as he dashed on the giant spirit beast. Blood splashed. Shortly after, the knife in his hand spun, and a piece of steak soaked in blood flew out of the spirit beast. Thud! Meat Demon Harry caught it. Blood flowed down from the steak and dripped onto the ground. Meat Demon Harry had an intoxicated look on his face. He brought the piece of meat to the tip of his nose and sniffed it. What a fragrant meat smell! Cooking this kind of meat makes me excited just thinking about it. Meat Demon Harry laughed loudly. Carrying the machete on his shoulder, he jumped down and landed in front of the stove that belonged to him. Water had been prepared, so he threw the blood-stained steak into the pot. Coincidentally, Meat Demon Harry also chose this spirit beast steak. Everybody was bewildered. Then, they screamed in surprise. The excitement on their faces was so thick that they couldn't be more excited. Steak. Both of them chose steaks. They wanted to fight each other to the end. Everybody took in a breath of cold air. They had seen the steak in Bufang's hand before. Since it was just a piece of steak, they couldn't tell what kind of spirit beast it was. However, could it be better than Meat Demon Harry's Divine Soul Realm spirit beast steak? It was impossible. So, Meat Demon Harry was about to win. Of course, nothing was absolute. Perhaps it would be a tit-for-tat chef's challenge. Many people were looking forward to it. Chu Chongqing's face was emotionless as he watched Meat Demon Harry cut a piece of steak from the spirit beast. The corners of his mouth twitched. Steak? Of all the parts you could have chosen, why did you choose steak? He could have tried to use different parts of the meat to create some miracles. But now miracles my foot. This was going to be a brutal and inhumane slaughter. He felt sad for Meat Demon Harry. Deep sorrow, swish. Meat Demon Harry drew the steak out of the water. After washing the blood, it was a piece of sky-shaking deer meat with red and white stripe. Steak. It was Meat Demon Harry's best dish. If Bufang didn't choose steak, he would have chosen it this time. Meat could be divided into good and bad. Even the meat of the same creature could be divided into good and bad. Thus, Meat Demon Harry had to choose good meat to cook. He lifted the big chopper and snatched it. Thud. The big chopper hit the chopping board. A chunk of meat was cut off and the minced meat splashed everywhere. After cutting the uneven steak into a round shape, Meat Demon Harry grinned, slamming the big chopper on the chopping board. His aura was ferocious. Red braised steak. It was Meat Demon Harry's favorite dish. He didn't cook this kind of high-grade spirit beast meat unless he had an opponent that could cheer him up. However, it was obvious that Bufang's appearance had pressured Meat Demon Harry. Boom! Flames shot up into the sky. Oil sprinkled, and the fire was so strong that the black wok glowed red from the heat. He decisively chopped the spirit herbs into fine powder, then placed the processed steak into the red-hot wok of oil. Steam instantly rose up from the wok. Sizzle! Sizzle! As soon as the ingredients were put into the wok, steam rose, and the aroma of meat filled the air. In just a blink of an eye, steam filled the entire place. Along with it, the aroma of steak could make people drown in it. Ah! Meat Demon Harry's excited laughter came from the hazy steam. Bufang looked at Meat Demon Harry, who was shrouded in steam, as if he was looking at an idiot. Was this fellow sick in the head? He couldn't stop laughing while cooking. Then, the dragon bone kitchen knife emerged in Bufang's slender hand. He used the back of the knife to knock the surface of the steak. Originally, Bufang wanted to cook sweet and sour Taotai ribs this time. For an ingredient like meat, the most important thing was its grade. Bufang's cooking level was not low to begin with. However, it was really hard to cook delicious food. Some chefs had to be busy for several days, or even more than 10 days to cook a dish. Swish, swish, swish. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in Bufang's hand. A moment later, waves of knife light flashed. It left many cuts on the steak that had been patted. Ha ha! Meat Demon Harry's laughter arose one more time. A moment later, the white steam was absorbed by a flow of energy. Meat Demon Harry's fat shivered. The dish in his hand was about to be displayed on the plate. Chapter 731. Tens of thousands of wisps of spirit energy congregated. The hot air that had been scattered suddenly moved. Then, it was absorbed by a force, congregating above the steak, filling it. Placing the steak on the plate, Meat Demon Harry sprinkled some spirit herbs on it. Then, he scooped up a ladle of boiling soup and poured it on the bulging steak. Sizzle! Sizzle! As the gravy was poured on the steak, it began to shake. The entire piece of meat seemed to be alive, shaking unceasingly. It was shaking intensely. Mwahaha! Sky-shaking mountain pass steak. It's done. The fat on Meat Demon Harry's entire body was shaking. He squinted his eyes, which seemed to have turned into slits. Light sparkled in his eyes. He was holding a round plate in his hand, and on the plate was a rosy steak. The steak was covered with a reddish-brown gravy, and the gravy was flowing slowly, sticky and hot. The steak was bulging, presenting an irregular semicircle. Light sparkled unceasingly inside, which looked really strange. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt, giving people a slight pressure. Meat Demon Harry was the first one to finish his dish, which made many people exclaim in astonishment. Meat Demon Harry was worthy of being ranked 5th on the tablet of gluttony. Just looking at his dish alone was enough to stun people. At the same time, Bufang's dish had started to get on the right track. Bufang opened his mouth, spurting a flame. That flame was gold and red, entering the bottom of the black turtle constellation wok, which made the wok's temperature rise in just a blink of an eye. After preparing some ingredients, He poured them into the black turtle constellation wok and stir-fried them. After stirring them for a while, he continued to simmer. At the same time, Bufang took out the taoyue's steak and started to cook. He had used the back of his knife to hit the taoyue's steak, which had loosened the meat and made it more elastic. Spirit, energy and energy were moving inside the steak. Bufang raised his hand, which was wrapped in black and white bandages. The souls of the black taotai and the white taotai were attached to the bandages. Snapping his fingers, a spark appeared on Bufang's unbandaged hand. That spark was the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Bufang's finger drew across his bandaged hand and instantly, the flame covered his entire hand. With a flick of the dragon bone kitchen knife, the steak that had just been hammered flew up and spun in the air before finally falling to the ground. With a slap, it fell on Bufang's hand. Bufang held it with his hand. What did Bufang want to do? Many people were a little bewildered, as they couldn't understand the dish Bufang was going to cook. Chu Chongqing was bewildered. He was looking forward to it. Even with his knowledge, he couldn't figure out what Bufang was trying to do. There was a pot beside him, so why did he have to use his hands to cook? Chi. The heaven and earth obsidian flame dashed around in Bufang's palm, turning into a flaming vortex. A piece of steak floated above the vortex, constantly rotating and being roasted by the flame. Cooking with the palm of his hand, this is quite interesting. This is the first time I've seen such an interesting cooking method. With their strength, they were naturally able to cook with their hand. However, this method of cooking consumed a lot of their true energy and mental energy. The slightest carelessness could result in exhaustion. In other words, the moment the true energy output was unstable, the ingredients would be destroyed. Therefore, if one wanted to cook with their palms, they must be very confident in their control. Normally, in a serious chef's challenge like this, no one would choose such an unstable cooking method. Therefore, although many people were curious about Bufang's cooking method, they had never seen it before. However, most of them felt that Bufang was digging his own grave and seeking his own death. Chi, the flame was quietly burning in Bufang's palm. The taoyue's meat floated above it, accepting the flames roasting. Bufang closed his eyes. Instantly, his powerful mental energy gushed out. The air around him seemed to have become stagnant. The surging mental energy made Bufang more skillful and skillful in controlling the heat. It was very important to the dish he was cooking. For today's dish, the heat control was the most important. There was nothing else. The color of the steak began to change. From its original uncooked color, it became rosy. Golden oil seeped out of the steak and dripped onto his palm. It was burned by the flames and evaporated into the air. While grilling, Bufang's other hand didn't stay idle. He constantly sprinkled seasoning on the steak. The seasoning made of spirit herb powder had an amazing aroma. When it was sprinkled on the steak, it was absorbed instantly, seeping into the steak. It made the steak look more vivid, making people salivate. The aroma rolled and rolled unceasingly, increasing people's appetite. The aroma of the meat shot up into the sky, diffusing everywhere. Bufang's hand shook, and the steak soared up into the sky. It spun half around, then fell back down, continuing to fry. The side of the steak that had been fried was slightly tender. White steam lingered above the steak, and the tender meat slightly trembled under the assault of the heat wave. It was so tempting. The projection formation zoomed in, instantly capturing the scene and projecting it out. Many people looked at it, smelling the thick aroma of the meat. They couldn't help but smack their lips. Their appetites burst out. Bufang slowly opened his closed eyes. His face was still emotionless. It wasn't hard for him to control the heat. Today, he planned to cook sweet and sour ribs or red braised meat, which were dishes he was good at. However, after a night of consideration, Bufang decided to cook steak, which he wasn't good at. It was because he suddenly remembered a meat dish from his previous life. The meat became rosy, and the color of the raw meat couldn't be seen anymore. Bufang's eyes focused. His mental sense told him that the steak was about 60% cooked. With a jerk of his other hand, he picked up the porcelain jar on the table and removed the lid, causing a rich wine fragrance to fill the air. Then, he poured the wine from the porcelain jar into it. In the blink of an eye, the cool and refreshing wine flowed out like a clear spring. It was like a smooth piece of silk, streaking across the air and rolling toward the steak in his hand. Sizzle! The wine covered the steak in just a blink of an eye. The vaporized wine instantly filled the air, and the white mist shrouded Bufang's figure, making it hard for others to see his appearance. Swish! The white steam was absorbed. A moment later, it was rolled up. Swish! A steak flew out of the white steam. A blue and white porcelain plate caught it. The white steam seemed to turn into a ball, spinning in Bufang's hands. Then, it became smaller and smaller. Bufang compressed it into a small ball, stuffing it under the steak. Picking up a red spirit fruit, the knife in his hand spun. Instantly, the spirit fruit was chopped into pieces. A vivid and lifelike miniature Taotai appeared, emitting a threatening spiritual energy. Lifting the black turtle constellation wok, a thick aroma soared up into the sky. Bufang took out the side dishes from the wok, scooping them around the steak. Instantly, a cracking sound arose. A misty white mist surged out from the bottom of the steak. Setting off the steak on the blue and white porcelain plate, it looked like it had an immortal aura. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand, gently poking the steak to feel the feedback of the steak. Yeah, just right. 70% cooked. Bufang took a step back, exhaling. He took off the velvet rope that tied his hair, letting his hair spread. Bufang's secret recipe, 70% cooked Taotai steak. Done. Bufang didn't need much time to cook. As soon as Meat Demon Harry finished, Bufang also finished his dish. At this moment, Meat Demon Harry's dish had just been served to the judges. Chu Chongsheng and the others left their seats, walking to the steak. Meat Demon Harry's steak slightly bulged, as if it had a radiance. This caused many people to be slightly surprised. Meat Demon Harry was smiling. This dish is called Sky-Shaking Mountain Pass Steak. I've used the spine of a 3-step divine soul realm spirit beast, the Sky-Shaking Deer. I've cooked it with my special method. I hope you like it, Harry said. Then, the machete in his hand slashed at the steak. His speed was as fast as lightning. The sudden turn of events caused everyone to cry out in alarm. What did Harry want to do? Did he want to destroy the dish he had spent so much effort to cook? The judges' pupils shrank, and they looked at Meat Demon Harry with a puzzled look. That machete was so sharp. With one slash, it could even break a porcelain plate. However, the corners of Harry's mouth only held a hint of a smile. Swish. Shortly after, the machete stopped, hovering 1 inch above the steak. It stopped an inch above the dish. The silence and the movement caused many people's hearts to shrink. A jet of knife energy shot out. He slashed at the bulging steak, and a cut was immediately made on the steak. A moment later, steam sizzled from the steak, shooting up into the sky. The steak was cut into 2 halves. Different dishes and sauces oozed out of the meat. The meat was juicy, which was too beautiful to behold. The aroma filled the entire place, making everybody exclaim in admiration. Chu Chongsheng took a deep breath. The taste of meat filled his mouth. Indeed, Meat Demon Harry's research on meat was one of the best in the Valley of Gluttony. Not many people could be his opponent. Chu Chongsheng picked up a dagger, cutting a small piece of the steak. He used the dagger to stab it, then put it into his mouth. The moment the steak entered his mouth, Chu Chongsheng's brows twitched. His originally serious eyes suddenly burst forth with an incomparable brilliance. Chapter 732. The Center of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court. 5-colored mountain range, heavenly spring holy land. In a valley in the mountain range, a deafening rumble reverberated. A moment later, the sound of rocks rolling reverberated. The mountain range shook, and a giant object slowly rose from within. It was a metal warship, incomparably majestic, with the Heavenly Spring Holy Land's flag fluttering on it. On the huge deck of the warship, the Heavenly Spring Holy Land's golden armor guards stood. Each of these golden armored guards was wearing a golden armor. Their killing intent was awe-inspiring, and their aura was surging wildly. A white-haired old man stood in front of the warship, his eyes filled with killing intent. The old man's clothes were torn in half, revealing half of his arms. He carried a giant axe on his back. The axe was red in color and was engraved with many complicated and mysterious patterns. Anyone who looked at it would be dazzled and mesmerized. This was the Heavenly Spring Holy Land's god-slaying equipment, the god-slaying axe. Every Holy Land had its own god-slaying equipment. However, because the blacksmiths in each Holy Land learned different inscriptions, the patterns and functions of the god-slaying equipment were different. The only similarity was that during the forging process of the god-slaying equipment, divine materials were added. This was the key to forging the god-slaying equipment. Destination: the Valley of Gluttony. Let's go. The old man's entire aura seemed to have undergone a huge change. He looked even more murderous. When he said the 3 words, Valley of Gluttony, the murderous aura in his voice made people's scalps go numb. It was as if there was some deep hatred between them. This time, it was the Amethyst Elder who gave him a chance. He must obtain the inheritance. If he failed again, he would face the Amethyst Elder's cruel punishment. Anyone who understood the Amethyst Elder's punishment would not want to endure that kind of punishment. It was a punishment that would torture a living person to insanity. Just as the array on the warship rumbled, white waves of energy gushed out. From within the mountain range, a graceful figure suddenly dashed out. That figure somersaulted in the air, then gracefully landed on the deck. The old man was startled, looking over suspiciously. He saw the person who stood up. Lady Saintess? The old man frowned and his expression turned solemn. This woman had a head of purple hair, but her eyes were a strange blue color. Her skin was fair and tender, and she had a fiery figure. She was extremely beautiful, and she gave off an exotic aura. This person was the Heavenly Spring Holy Land's Saintess, Ziyun. Of course, Saintess was just a title. This woman's true identity was incredible. She was Amethyst Elder's only daughter, the apple of his eye. The old man didn't understand why Saint Daughter Ziyun would appear here. Let's go. Don't mind me, I'm just hitching a ride. Ziyun was wearing a tight-fitting purple warrior robe and looked quite heroic. A boat with a free ride. The old man's mouth twitched. Their battleship was going to flatten the Valley of Gluttony and seize the inheritance. Why did Saint Daughter Ziyun come here? The rumors said that Saint Daughter Ziyun was extremely rebellious. She had escaped 99 times and was always caught by the Amethyst Elder. Now, was she planning to escape from the Holy Land for the 100th time? From the looks of it, it should be her. If you dare to inform Amethyst Elder, I will make sure your battleship can't leave this valley. Saint Daughter Ziyun rolled her eyes. The old man's face changed. It was his last chance. He couldn't let it go. Thus, he hesitated. Our Holy Land Saint's son was killed, right? His soul needs to be saved by this Saintess, Saintess Ziyun said with a serious expression. Everyone in the Heavenly Spring Holy Land knew how bad the relationship between the Saint's son and the Saintess was. What was the point of using such an excuse? Alright, it was still meaningful. The old man's eyes sparkled. At least it gave him a chance to leave the ship. Then, Saintess, please enter the cabin. The battleship is about to depart. Saint Daughter Ziyun's beautiful face arched her brows. You old man. Not bad. You have a bright future. Saint Daughter Ziyun patted the old man's shoulder. A moment later, her slender legs strode into the cabin. The old man's mouth twitched. No matter what, Saint Daughter Ziyun would be captured by Amethyst Elder soon. It didn't matter if she gave him a ride. This time, our target is the Valley of Gluttony. We can't fail. Exhaling, the old man's eyes became sharp one more time. His voice became cold. Move out. At the same time, many famous mountains and scenic spots in the hidden dragon continent were visited by experts. Amidst lightning and wind, a terrifying aura expanded. And they all had one target: Valley of Gluttony. Gluttony Square. At this moment, the entire plaza was enveloped by the dense fragrance of meat. The fragrance caused everyone's face to reveal a satisfied expression. It smells so good. This meat demon's character isn't good, but I have to say that his cooking is really good. I want to eat it. This aroma is so tempting. As the audience looked at the projection in the sky, they even drooled. Down below, the judges were using their daggers to cut a piece of meat with thick juices flowing on it. They shoved it into their mouth. Munch, munch. As soon as the meat entered their mouths, people's eyes widened. It was like a beam of lightning had flashed in their eyes. This feeling had really shocked them. This feeling, their mouths were chewing fast, and the munching sounds echoed unceasingly. In the next moment, he swallowed all of them with a gulp. Boom! It was as if a volcano was about to erupt, causing everyone's hair to stand on end. Their eyes were filled with disbelief, and their skin was slightly flushed. Spicy, fragrant, and mellow. The three tastes blended perfectly. The spicy meat, the fragrant meat, and the mellow meat. As soon as the meat entered their mouths, the three tastes burst out like an icy chain locking their taste buds. It made people feel like they were standing in front of a volcano that was about to erupt. That heat wave attacked them unceasingly. When it reached its limit, they swallowed it. That volcano's brewing had reached its limit, and it exploded. Flames shot up into the sky, and sparks shot everywhere. That feeling made people gasp in admiration. It was Meat Demon Harry's sky shaking mountain pass steak. The taste of this meat was worthy of Meat Demon Harry's name. Everyone's faces were filled with admiration. Meat Demon Harry's strength was really not bad. Unfortunately, Meat Demon Harry only knew how to cook meat. If he were asked to cook other dishes, his level would be at an ordinary first-grade chef's level. If it weren't for the severe deviation, Meat Demon Harry's ranking on the tablet of gluttony could have been higher. Chu Chongqing dropped his dagger, exhaling gently. He wiped the oil around his mouth, his eyes complicated. This dish was really delicious. However, after tasting Bufang's roasted Taoyes hoof, his picky taste had reached another level. Although this meat wasn't bad, it was much worse than Bufang's Taotai meat. Otherwise, this dish was enough to make his clothes explode. However, his clothes didn't explode. Thus, the judges quieted down. They wanted to say something, but seeing Chu Chongqing's calm face, they were bewildered. What's going on? Why didn't Chu Chongqing's clothes explode? This kind of dish, the Great Elder shouldn't have no reaction, right? At least, his clothes should be bulging, right? Meat Demon Harry and the others also paid attention to this point. The original hustle and bustle gradually dissipated. The audience's passion for this dish seemed to cool down with Chu Chongqing's calm face. Many people were whispering to each other, chattering non-stop. In the end, they had just seen the dish, and the ones who had tasted it were the judges. Was it that dish that tasted bad? It couldn't even bulge the Great Elder's clothes? The smile on Meat Demon Harry's face slowly disappeared. He looked at Chu Chongqing, his eyes full of doubt. He didn't ask because there were some things that he didn't need to ask. Tap, tap, tap. While everyone's breathing became sluggish, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Many people turned their gazes and looked at the source of the footstep. Bufang's slender figure slowly walked out from his stove. In his hand, he was holding a dish covered by a semicircular iron lid. The audience couldn't see what Bufang was cooking. Bufang was calm, as if he didn't feel guilty for breaking the silence. Moreover, his face was emotionless. He didn't look worried at all. He was full of confidence in his dish. He indifferently scanned the entire place, the corners of his mouth rising. He placed the dish in his hand on the table. Then, his eyes slightly lowered, falling on the few judges. Then, he said faintly, after tasting his dish, "It's my turn now, guys. My dish is here. Please don't blink." Chu Chongsheng looked at the iron lid, his breathing quickening in just a blink of an eye. Taotai meat. He had a little bit of hope in his heart. The others didn't know what Bufang's dish was, but after hearing Bufang's words and that strange iron lid, they were curious and expectant. The audience was the same. Some of them even craned their necks to watch. They were curious about the earth-shaking dish under the iron lid. Bufang raised the corners of his mouth. He gently lifted the iron lid. Sizzle! 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 As soon as the lid was lifted, white steam shot out from it. What came with it was the extremely thick meaty aroma. The meaty aroma had almost materialized. In just a blink of an eye, it turned into ripples, expanding from the dish to the entire gluttony square. A beam of light shot out from the white steam. Then, 2 beams, 3 beams, 4 beams. A moment later, the radiance was so dazzling. It was dazzling and dazzling. Everyone had a look of shock on their faces. They were so frightened. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.